Hello everyone. Paper Mario is one of my favorite game series. It's an interesting one when you look at how much it's evolved over the course of 6 entries. Its creativity and appealing aesthetics have endeared me ever since I first played the original on the Nintendo 64, and it's had its hooks in me since. Each Paper Mario title has its own strengths and weaknesses, which I laid out in thorough detail in my Best and Worst series. Watch those for my full thoughts on each individual game. But it's time to tackle this series in a different way. We're going to delve a whole lot deeper here and now. I'm going to rank all 47 chapters in the Paper Mario series. So, settle in. Before we begin though, I have to lay some things out. First, I'll be covering the 6 main Paper Mario titles in extreme detail, so I'm making this very clear to expect full, complete spoilers for Paper Mario, The Thousand Year Door, Super Paper Mario, Sticker Star, Color Splash, and The Origami King. I'll be meticulously combing through nearly every part of these games, so be aware of that. Second, this should go without saying, but Mario & Luigi Paper Jam will not at all be showing up in this ranking. It is primarily a Mario & Luigi title, and I won't be bringing it up again, starting now. Third, the Thousand Year Door remake will also not be considered in the ranking. I played the original version of the game when ranking its chapters, so none of the changes present in the new version will be factoring into it whatsoever. So, how did I come to 47 chapters? Let's lay them out. The original Paper Mario has a prologue and 8 chapters, starting us at 9. The Thousand Year Door is the exact same, bringing us to 18. Super Paper Mario doesn't really have a prologue, but does have 8 full chapters, bringing us to 26. Sticker Star is another bare bones introduction, so no prologue for this one either. It has 6 main chapters, so we're at 32. Color Splash adds another 8, and I'm including the prologue for this one. While it does only take place in Port Prisma, it has more going on narratively than Sticker Star's Decalburg, and gameplay-wise than Super's. It seems to regularly be considered enough to be ranked with the other chapters, but just barely manages to qualify. That gets us to 40. Finally, the Origami King provides the last 7 chapters, including another prologue, which this time's robust. At least what I'm considering its prologue. Before we move on, I want to mention that when it comes to ranking anything, everyone has different opinions, and there's a lot to consider when going through these. But if you've ever seen my videos, you know I always present my work as my opinions. So don't take my picks as some kind of end-all, be-all, this is how it is, 100% objectively, or any bullshit like that. You can easily make a case for why you might prefer one chapter to another. There are a lot of elements to these, and different things are more important for different people. While this is not an attempt at being objective, I did do my best to be fair, but I'm not a robot, so some of my own personal feelings are going to affect the rankings. And I'm no stranger to having hot takes, so get ready for that. With all that said, let's all like what we like and have fun celebrating this remarkable series we all love so much. Are you relaxed? Because this is gonna be a long one. It's time to start ranking every Paper Mario chapter. So, the first question, what's the very worst? The absolute bottom of the barrel chapter Paper Mario has ever produced? Am I gonna blow some minds? Not at all. It's actually really obvious. Number 47, Sticker Star's Chapter 6, World 6, The Sky. Yup, Sticker Star's final chapter is the worst in the series, and honestly, I'd be shocked to see anyone hold this in some kind of special place. This easily deserves the bottom spot, for several reasons, but that said, it's not entirely without things to appreciate. This world's split into 3 areas. Gate Cliff's first, and isn't really a level. You come here after collecting the royal stickers, and then the next level opens. Stickers. Alright. Bowser Jr.'s Flotilla is an actual level, and the only saving grace of this last place shitshow. This is actually the first time Paper Mario tried an airship theme, and while it's brief and very straightforward, its originality does leave an impression. Originality for Paper Mario. This is where the final fight against Bowser Jr. takes place, and it's actually pretty fun. You use tail stickers to whack his projectiles back at him. A simple satisfaction. But since tail stickers are limited, it suffers from a common sticker star issue where you can end up having a cruddy time if you run out of resources. As a character, Bowser Jr. shows about as much depth as he always has, which is that of a puddle. Really just an annoying, self-assured brat, so he's not only uncompelling, but fails completely as any kind of threat. The final level is Bowser's Sky Castle, and I struggle to call this one a level. Outside of a random sequence where you walk down a moving carpet with some gaps, there's nothing here except the fights against Comic and Bowser. It's a shame it's so nothing, but I can only assume this was done because they didn't want you to blow through all your stickers before the fights, but it's a real letdown as a final dungeon. And I mean, just look at it. It's so generic, it barely feels like they're trying. The Comic fight's about as sucky as it is in World 2. Comic probably deserves some credit for being one of the few characters with an actual identity in this game, but as a constant mischief maker, he's not very charismatic. How rad is it that he literally disintegrates after being beaten, though? The final battle against Bowser is one of the most infamous things about Sticker Star, and yeah, no kidding, it completely deserves its infamy. This fight's not only long, but easily frustrating. Moving through phases is a hassle if you didn't bring specific sticker effects with you, so it can be insanely trial and error. A terrible thing for a final fight to be. While some of these phases have interesting ideas, it's a problem with how the game's designed in the first place. It's hard to know what you can or can't use because you don't know what he's going to pull out next. Crippling Bowser with certain things is a good idea, but because the fight expects you to come prepared, and you have no way of knowing what to bring beforehand, it quickly becomes a chore. The only narrative moment worth mentioning is Kirsty's sacrifice, and I'm being generous. It's a nifty idea to use her as a sticker, but even slightly suggesting that I would have any emotional attachment to this character is pure comedy. Kirsty isn't especially likable, and in a narrative with hardly any depth, this uninspired attempt at a gut punch almost feels like a parody. The ending is drivel and outstandingly phoned in. Peach and Bowser are barely characters, and Kirsty appears alive and well since Mario wished for her to come back. We all laugh and slit our throats as it fades out on the worst ending and quote-unquote narrative the series has ever seen. At least there's a parade before closing a book, like this game had a story that wasn't shallow bullshit. This is a really poor final chapter for a Paper Mario game that only has one real level. It's nearly impossible to care about anything going on and ends on one of the worst final boss fights Nintendo's ever produced. I'll throw a bone to Flutter, who flies you up here. That's at least a nice way to use one of the more pivotal characters from the game. But regardless, Sticker Star's World 6 is the greatest trial for a Paper Mario fan. If you can get through this and not want to launch the game into the sun, you're ready for anything this series has to throw at you. Number 46, Color Splash's Chapter 7, Black Bowser's Castle. Man, the more modern Paper Mario games are really nailing it with these final chapters. Welcome to the party, Color Splash. This final chapter is very brief, arguably even shorter than Sticker Star since that one at least had an airship level. Still, this one does manage to be more enjoyable, but not by much. It's ranked this low for a reason, which we'll get to shortly. As a setting, this place isn't anything special. Bowser's Castle's been done a lot in the Mario series, and a few times already just in Paper Mario. This one at least has some semblance of atmosphere, with a few visually interesting rooms, like the Bomb Factory, but despite these glimpses of originality, it's a by-the-book Bowser's Castle. Driving up Rainbow Road to get here with Luigi's a cute start. There's also a solid boss fight against the last remaining Koopaling Roy, and I have to give it up to his characterization. Despite entirely being relegated to a boss fight, he makes a strong impression thanks to his humorous smack talk and how competently he ambushes Mario. He actually comes off as kind of intimidating. He's the highlight of the chapter and one of the best boss fights in the game. He starts by taking all of your paint and shooting it back at you, different colors having different effects on your movement. That's a really fun idea, and plays out well provided you remember to bring the washing machine. Shout out to the fittingly chaotic track here. Black Bowser's castle leaves a lot to be desired as a level. There's just not much to it. It has a few chase scenarios with black paint, which can give you an instant game over, but save points are so frequent that even if you mess up, you don't lose much progress. This is all pretty standard for a finale, but the major thing dragging it down is the final boss, Black Bowser. Another Bowser fight to try your patience, since you can only beat it with proper block timing. It's not that hard to time, but without knowing the moves beforehand, it's easy to mess up, which is harshly punished by wasting every card you used the previous turn. Topping it off is his last breath attack, which is also very punishing thanks to an especially deceptive timing. This is nowhere near Sticker Star final boss levels of misery, but it's not a great fight because it relies on the guard gimmick. It's the kind of final boss that's easy to fail on a first attempt because you have to learn how it works. Bowser doesn't offer much in this game as a character. He's actually being controlled by the black paint, an interesting idea they don't really do much with. After he's defeated, you escape the crumbling castle, and Huey stays behind to wring it out and save Prism Island. Huey doesn't exactly die in this ending, but it's played very somberly. He seems to go away to never be seen again for some reason. He's a very likable partner, so unlike Kirsty's half-hearted attempt at a sacrifice, this moment works well for the caliber of storytelling here. It's a nice ending for Color Splash, with a quick celebration and tasteful credit sequence. As a final chapter, this one's decidedly generic. I like Roy, I like the Bomb Factory, Huey's sacrifice is a good moment, and the Rainbow Road's an inspired inclusion. But otherwise, there's not a lot of depth here, and the unfortunate final boss is enough to land this as the weakest chapter of the game and the second worst chapter in the series. Number 45, Color Splash's Prologue, Port Prisma. And we return to the beginning. Like I said before, I struggled on whether or not to include this prologue since it's not much of a chapter on its own. It's just involved enough to make it onto the list, but as you can see by this ranking, it hasn't exactly gone far. That's not to say it's bad for what it's intended to be. Color Splash starts off on an interesting note, sailing to Prism Island after Peach receives a colorless toad in the mail. Port Prisma itself's a nice place. It's not big, but it makes a good impression thanks to its charm. Not so much when you arrive though, as you enter an abandoned town with a nice, unnerving atmosphere. It's great at drawing you into the scenario while figuring out what's going on, with a nice splash of horror thrown in since Shy Guys are literally slurping the color right off toads. Now that's a cool premise. Huey's immediately endearing thanks to how much humor and personality he has. He's very reactionary and a fantastic partner for the adventure. Despite the toads' lack of individuality, they're written well enough that they're entertaining to listen to. Peach also gets to hang out at the start and doesn't even get kidnapped by the time you wrap this place up. It's nice to see her just chill for a change. That's kind of all there is to this one. This prologue's really just a single level introducing the storyline and systems while you make your way around Port Prisma. So why the low ranking when it lacks any real flaws? Simply put, there's just very little to it. Nothing here is problematic, but it's so bare bones. It's fun to play through and a nice start to the adventure, but perhaps a bit drawn out for how little's actually going on. The other ranked prologues are a lot better at getting you excited. They at least offer more exploration. As is, while not bad, this one just doesn't have much to offer, so it ends up being forgettable. Number 44, Sticker Stars Chapter 1, World 1, The Grasslands. From one inoffensive chapter to another, there really isn't anything that bad about Sticker Stars Chapter 1, but this is undoubtedly milquetoast, dime a dozen, unambitious, generic grassland Mario theme goodnight. What do you even say about it? It's a grass world, with pretty much no story, no characters outside of introductions to the major players, enemies are entirely made up of the usual Goomba, Koopa, Buzzy Beetle troops. Even the boss of the entire chapter's a Goomba. A grassland theme to settle you in isn't a problem. Most Paper Mario games start with a similar aesthetic, but it's very overdone throughout the franchise, and particularly uninspired here. Almost nothing in all 6 of these levels help this chapter stand out. Let's break them down. The Warm Fuzzy Plains introduces Bowser Jr., and that's about all there is to this place. Bouquet Gardens is next, text, also with very little going on, and really just used to introduce the concept of things. Water's Edge Way follows and establishes Kamek, who fares better than Bowser Jr. since he's at least a bit smarmy. The area does have a more intricate layout than the last few, but is still unremarkable. Hither Thither Hill's the fourth area, and I guess the famous one since this is the template for the Paper Mario stage in Super Smash Bros., so yay! There's an escort mission with a Toad here, and a boss fight against a big buzzy beetle that'll put you to sleep. Whamino Mountain's an optional level, and although it's a bit different looking, it's not very fun to explore. There are way too many enemies here. A problem for most of these levels, to be fair. And this one's design's rudimentary at best. The mountain chaos is cute, but not enough to justify its existence, since it really only offers an unimpressive shop. Finally, there's Goomba Fortress, which at least manages a similar vibe to the usual Chapter 1 castle, but it's not only boring, it's entirely unmemorable. And like I said, the boss is just a Goomba, the Mega Sparkle Goomba, a group of Goombas who happened upon a royal sticker and went nuts with power. Don't expect any more depth than that. The fight itself isn't great, but that's kind of the standard for Sticker Star bosses, though the battle theme's actually pretty good. And that's about all there is to this one. Like I said, this chapter doesn't really have a plot. Outside of helping some toads, there aren't even any characters outside of bad guys trying to get in your way. Kirsty hardly has a presence. She exists to tell you what to do, which to be fair is like a lot of partners throughout the series, but she doesn't even try to mask it and just comes off as a bossy guide. Despite this chapter not having any egregious low points, it ranks this far down because it has nothing coming close to a high point. I get it. It's easing you into the game's flow, as most Chapter 1s do, but considering Sticker Star's departure from the priorities of older titles, it only ends up being an off-putting introduction. This is distilled Mario Game World 1, and so safe and uninspired, it's downright boring. Number 43, Super Paper Mario's Chapter 1, Line Land. Super makes its first appearance, and honestly, it can get comfortable. Line Land isn't that much better than the Grasslands, but at least it offers more variety. Still, a lot of my problems with that chapter are problems I have for this one. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of players straight up quit the game before finishing this chapter, and that's not to say it's awful, just profoundly unimpressive. There's barely anything noteworthy about it. As I touched on, first chapters throughout this series tend to play it safe to ease you into mechanics and set up plot points and characters. But this is way too safe and way too slow. The actual story intro's thankfully quick at setting things up, with only a handful of scenes until you're on Line Land Road. Unfortunately, the overarching narrative doesn't give you much to care about by this point, and conversations have such an excessive amount of silliness that it can give the impression Super Paper Mario's story is going to be a gigantic farce. While the narrative turns things around later on, this first selection of levels does nothing to give you the impression of depth, and how basic the level design is doesn't help. Line Land Road's your typical plains area with Goombas, but outside of Bestovius, who gives you the flip power, there's not much to find here. It's a really small area. Mount Line Land follows and isn't much better. There's a bit of arbitrary platforming before you hit the town where most of your time's taken up by NPCs. The dialogue's at least entertaining, particularly Old Man Watchit's, but this is clear padding for a level without much to it. Yold Desert's better, but still lacking. Figuring out how to get through this place is okay, and despite how easy the O-Chunks fight is, it's adequate enough for being the first boss. O-Chunks is an alright character. Sometimes he's funny, sometimes he's not. He's more brawn than brains, but when showing tenderness, he can actually be quite endearing. The desert ends up being pretty dull because nothing stands out about it. It's a basic video game level. Finishing the chapter is Yold Ruins, and a tame ending. Some of these puzzles are alright, but there's just nothing interesting about this location or how it's presented. And it certainly doesn't feel like a believable ruin. The boss, Fractale's probably the most notable thing in the whole chapter, with a fair amount of spectacle and funny references. Easily defeated, but that's not exactly surprising for this game. That's kind of everything here though. 4 areas with simple gameplay and not a thought to be found. This is a rough start for a Paper Mario title that's already deviating from the beloved formula of past entries. It doesn't take long to go through, but it's hard to care about anything this early on. The chapter just doesn't give you much to work with. I know, it's another starting chapter, essential to teaching you how to play the game, and as that, it gets the job done. As for the pixels, Tippy's a fine enough guide throughout the game, but doesn't reveal much of a personality until halfway. She's not unlikable, but markedly basic. I don't have much to say about Thoro. He's fine, but pixels have really basic characterization and minimal scenes. They're really just for puzzles. I don't hate them or anything, but they're about as unremarkable as this chapter. Number 42, Super Paper Mario's Chapter 2, Gloam Valley. Well, look at that. We're continuing with the very next Super Paper Mario chapter. It's like we're going in order. This one's called Gloam Valley, but the majority of this chapter's spent in Merle's mansion. While this is a step up from Line Land, Super Paper Mario's barely gotten going by this point. Unlike Chapter 1, some interesting ideas are at least present here, but even with that considered, these levels leave a lot to be desired, and they're not exactly imaginative. Gloam Valley's first up, with more interesting level design than anything Line Land offered. Having Peach along as a permanent party member helps, as well as Boomer, a pixel serving as the requisite bomb partner. He asks random questions when you meet him. That's it. This is an adequate level with a catchy track. It's exciting to arrive at Merle's mansion. It makes a nice first impression thanks to her gnarly looking pets, but sadly, it doesn't live up to the potential, and has an insanely annoying background theme. Mimi's introduced here, an entertaining member of Count Bleck's entourage. She's a troublemaker done right, and one of the support beams lifting this chapter up. Funny that that's the case, since whenever she's around, the pacing goes out the window. The mansion's split into 3 segments. The first involves running around empty rooms with traps until you stumble upon how to move forward. It's a shallow chapter serving as setup for the next section, and quite the infamous one at that. Conceptually, having to deal with a massive debt in a prison-like workplace is a novel idea with a lot of promise, but its half-hearted execution destroys any chance of that here. This level's straight up not fun to play through, and a massive pace breaker at a terrible time since Chapter 1 isn't a strong introduction. Chapter 2 needed to show up here, but after including this portion, it absolutely doesn't. If you're on the verge of quitting this game, you'll almost certainly drop it here. If you know how to pay off the debt, or even just look it up online, you can skip the busy work, and I wouldn't blame you for that since trying to get through this naturally demands you spend roughly 10 minutes running in a hamster wheel to get the code. You also pick up Slim here, who has a cool power but one-note personality. The last area is the basement. This part's okay, but the maze-like rooms aren't exactly fun to work your way around. Finding Merle in the bathroom is unique, and the game show to figure out which one's real, with questions you even get to pick yourself, is at least trying. Mimi's true form is one of the most fun things about her, but the battle's so simple it's boring, making for a lukewarm ending to a lukewarm chapter. Like I said, this is a step up from Super's Chapter 1, actually hosting some creative ideas, but the gameplay and narrative just do not deliver at all, ultimately presenting a chapter that feels underdeveloped. Several sections feel like padding, and despite the comical writing, it feels like a crutch in place of competent game design. If you cut Gloam Valley out completely and made the whole chapter set in Merle's mansion, maybe turned the debt-paying section into something less grindy, and went for more of a jailbreak vibe with more intricate level design, you could have had something great with this one. As is, it's unspectacular, and only remembered for how ridiculous its expectations are. Number 41, Sticker Stars Chapter 2, World 2, The Desert. Yes, I do think this is a better chapter than Super Paper Mario's early offerings. This one's fairly disliked for its confusing level layouts, cryptic progression, and overabundance of enemies. And while these are all true things, it at least has some interesting ideas. It's set up so you have to track down 3 treasures to unlock the final area, creating some non-linearity, which is nice, but that can also be a problem. If you're not diligently exploring these locations, it's easy to get lost on how to progress. The slowing quicksand and, like I said, way too many enemies can make these environments very draining to explore. I guess that fits the aesthetic though? Dry Bake Desert's the first level, and sadly pretty big for how much quicksand it has. The secret path's a fun discovery, but not one that requires much thought. A plaque just tells you where to go. It would have been cool as more of a riddle. The Yoshi Sphinx is next, and one of the more novel settings Sticker Star has to offer, though even this idea is not entirely original. This place can be a drag to get through since the closed environment makes it harder to avoid enemies, and figuring out how to get through can take some time. The Paratroopa Squadron's a fun idea that only amounts to a typical battle, so it's over before you know it. The comic fight isn't typical, but also isn't fun thanks to its gimmick that can easily cause you to waste valuable stickers. All this considered, the Yoshi Sphinx isn't that bad of an area. At least it has depth. The Sandshifter Ruins are next, and oh boy, this is one of the worst levels in the game. A maze-like environment with, guess what, too many enemies, and moving around is tedious and easily confusing. At least it doesn't take long to fully explore. The Damp Oasis is next, and isn't much of a level. You use a few thing stickers to find one of the treasures, and that's it. I guess an oasis is an easy inclusion for the theme. That leaves Dry Bake Stadium, a pretty adequate dungeon-like location for Paper Mario, that even has its own flavor with these unique murals. It's a solid level for Sticker Star in particular, with decent puzzles that ask for careful observation. The boss is Tower Power Pokey, who falls into the category of dangerous creatures with no character. I like its design, and how the arena resembles a baseball field, hinting the best way to take it down. Conceptually, this is a much better fight than the Mega Sparkle Goomba, with an even better battle theme. I know deserts aren't the most popular video game settings, and to be fair, this one's nothing special. It doesn't really have a story, and has even less characters than the Grasslands did, but the overarching goal's more engaging. I can see why it might be hated for being confusing, but the few interesting ideas it does have are enough to ensure it's not the most uninspired chapter from Sticker Star, but it certainly isn't one to write home about. Number 40, Super Paper Mario's Chapter 4, Outer Space. For setting an entire chapter in an abstract environment like outer space, man does this game not have a clue what to do with it. It's another Super Paper Mario mixed bag. To start, Squirps the alien guide's a highlight. He's cute, entertaining, and even provides functionality as a projectile weapon. His presence throughout the chapter lends it some much needed personality. The first level's rough. It's almost completely devoid of content and only houses some enemies and rocks to get you used to the new controls. It's barely a level. Planet Blobule follows and is a step up. At least it's platforming, and unique platforming thanks to the low gravity. That said, it's pretty annoying to actually play and get around. There's a lot of flipping and climbing, and everything looks identical. There are a few alien NPCs, but half-assed doesn't even begin to describe these creatures. There's like 3 of them, they live in run-of-the-mill homes, and only the Elder has any purpose. You also pick up Fleep here by bringing him paper for the bathroom. There's that timeless Super Paper Mario wit, and it's kind of what the whole level's about. I don't even know how to describe his personality. Fanciful, his flipping ability's at least useful. The third level's the Outer Limits, in one of the worst individual areas of the game. More generic space, just like the first level, but maze-like this time, and you also lose Squirps squirps, so attacking's pretty limited. You have to find a convenience store to buy a chocolate bar for squirps, so you can move on and finish the level. Good freaking god, they're not even trying to hide how underdeveloped this is. This chapter would be ranked a lot lower if not for the final area, the Woe Zone. Finally, a level in Super Paper Mario that actually has a well-done concept and execution. Visually, this place stands out, and exploration's fun thanks to the gravity-flipping buttons. It also ends with the introduction of the famous Mr. L, a brainwashed Luigi playing the role of an evil villain, and pretty dang entertaining. The fight against his metal brobot in space is fast-paced and a good time, playing like a 2D shooter. It's over a bit quickly, but is still a very stimulating boss in a game desperate for them. Afterwards, it all ends on a heartwarming scene between Squirps and his mother's statue, which is really sweet. This chapter's all over the place. It turns out exploring space really isn't fun when it's designed like this. It's not only slow, but it's filled with forced fetch quests. Like, did the developers have no idea what to do with this setting? Moving through space is comparable to swimming underwater, and regular platforming's only in the 4th area. That's not a good sign. This one's just so tedious. Squirps, the Woe Zone, and Mr. L are the only things keeping this one from being ranked lower. Outer space is such a great idea, with boundless potential, that this chapter doesn't come close to. It's a slog to get through and just plain boring. Number 39, Sticker Stars Chapter 5, World 5, The Jungle. Dang, only 2 more Sticker Star chapters left after this, and we just entered the 30s. This is an unfortunate one. These areas are pretty well designed for Sticker Star, but a few specific sections drag it down. This is also one of the most narratively barren chapters in the entire series. The only thing that happens here is Kirsty getting eaten by Petey Piranha, which is pretty funny. There aren't any other characters in this chapter. Not even Bowser Jr. or Comic appear in this world, and because of that, it ends up feeling very self-contained. While the level design's solid, with a particular exception, it's just so standard not much stands out about it. Shy Guy Jungle's first, with attractive visuals and a nice track. The idea of chasing down Shy Guys to find cutouts is a good one, but it's not very fun in practice, and it doesn't help that this level's oversaturated with enemies. Skipping the next 2 levels, believe me, I will get to them, we have the Chomp Ruins, probably one of the best levels in Sticker Star. It's not only an interesting place to explore, it has adequate puzzles, a lot of secret paths, and a Chain Chomp fight that's dealt with in a clever way. It's a well-crafted area. Rugged Road's next, another good level with satisfying progression. It's your standard volcano-themed area, which continues into the next one, Rumble Volcano. Moving forward here involves using Chain Chomps to weigh down a lava-lifted elevator. That's certainly creative. Petey Piranha's the boss. It's cool to see this character show up in the Paper Mario series, but maybe a little unfitting to have him hanging out in a volcano of all places. His characterization boils down to he eats. I guess they're going for silliness, but man does he feel tossed in. The fight's very straightforward. Since it doesn't ask for any particular things, it's one of the more enjoyable bosses in Sticker Star, but it also makes less of an impression. Looking at this chapter so far, it's not a half bad offering for this game, but how about those 2 stages I passed over? River rafting. Oh boy. At least it's a new idea, but these levels are not fun to play through. The raft takes forever to respawn, so it's really easy to get hit and quickly becomes aggravating. The first of these levels, Jungle Rapids, is manageable enough, but the second, Long Fall Falls, is the worst level in Sticker Star. Dodging a giant fish while heading downriver, which isn't too bad the first time through, but this level will likely have to be completed twice, since the progressive path is the more cryptic one. For some reason, the fish gets faster the second go-around, but because your raft's so slow to respond, it practically feels like RNG, and it's an instant game over if you're even close to its mouth. A ridiculous punishment for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It practically feels untested. This single level is so bad, it drags down the entire chapter. But to be fair, the jungle's not exactly presenting much of note. It's an uncomplicated world that ends up feeling quite short. When it comes to puzzle and platforming levels, it gets the job done, but without much to care about, it can only go so far. Number 38, The Thousand Year Door's Prologue, A Rogue's Welcome. What is this? Ranking a simple prologue above full chapters with variety and ideas? Yeah. Because even as a simple prologue, this one's more fun than anything we've talked about so far. Welcome, The Thousand Year Door. It's nice to see you break up the super sticker parade that's been going on, but don't get comfortable. This is a short prologue, but despite not a lot happening, it has plenty going for it. The Thousand Year Door's story's immediately absorbing. A lot of mysteries are set up from the get-go. Where's Princess Peach? Who's this mysterious group? What's behind the Thousand Year Door? It's a fantastic way to get you interested in the adventure. Goombella's also introduced here, one of the best partners joining right off. As the tattler, she has an advantage of being more fleshed out than the others, and comes off as strong-willed and competent. Her battle application isn't anything special, but if you're like me and tattle every enemy, she'll be used more than anyone else. Professor Frankly's also introduced here, another likable Goomba with a bumbling passion for archaeology. Lord Crump appears as well, but there's not much to his encounter. Oh, and Toadsworth is in this game. Okay. Expected for a prologue, there's a lot of talking and tutorializing. Thankfully, it's well paced. Despite dumping a bunch of text, the game does its best to keep things snappy. Rogueport's one of those iconic hub towns that's easy to fall in love with. Its flavor lends it a lot of character. Shout out to the background track, it's a classic. There is a boss fight against a blooper, but being this early, it's of course very simple. There's not much else to say about this one. It's a prologue and victim to the usual text dump prologues have, but with that considered, it does well enough to capture your attention and pump you up for the adventure ahead. There isn't much to it, so naturally it's not going to rank too highly, but as is, this is a well done, necessary part of getting the game going. Number 37, Super Paper Mario's Chapter 6, Sammer's Kingdom. Of all 47 chapters, this was the most difficult to rank. If you've played it, you know why. Despite the very unexpected direction the story takes in this chapter, I simply can't justify placing it any higher when looking at its content. Sammer's Kingdom's an odd one. The void's really big in this world, and you're tasked with fighting through 100 Sammer guys to claim the pure heart before everything comes crashing down. It's a cute idea for a chapter, but an immediate turnoff on your first playthrough, realizing instead of going to a brand new environment to explore, all you'll be doing is fighting through 100 fairly similar battles. After a lot of the bullshit super pulls in earlier chapters, it's fair to think the game's actually going to make you do this, and you do fight the first 20 of them. Then things get good. The void grows so large the Sammer guys stop fighting, instead urging you to get to the king as soon as possible. There's even a surprise boss fight against Mimi to slow you down. 100 fights is a long way though, so you actually run out of time. Not even halfway to the pure heart, the entire world is consumed by the void. Round of applause for this one, Super Paper Mario. This is a fantastic story moment, directly showing the threat of the void so stakes are more felt than ever. And hooray, it also means you don't have to do the other 80 battles, because they all died. After returning to Flipside, you head back to Sammer's Kingdom, where you're greeted with a jaw-dropping sight. A stretch of emptiness with only a few small crumbs of the kingdom left. That's how you make an impact. You end up fighting Mr. L in his Brobot again here, upgraded to Brobot L type, and this is a much easier fight than even the first 20 Sammer guys, but it's nice to see more of Mr. L before his untimely demise. Dimentio shows up and seemingly assassinates him in another great story moment. It really feels like the narrative's taking off at this point, but that's actually it for Chapter 6. I know you're mad. I know you want me to include the following sequence where you're sent to the underwear, but I'm actually going to include that with Chapter 7, since it's directly related to that chapter, and 6 really ended when you collected the Stone Pure Heart. When you consider the content of Sammer's Kingdom, it's one of the worst chapters in this series, but the plot twist with the world actually getting destroyed, and the shock of seeing an empty realm in its place is why this chapter manages to rank this highly. And even then, it's difficult to give it more credit than other chapters, with actual level design and variety. But the world being destroyed is just so unexpected and more memorable than anything we've covered so far. But still, looking at this chapter, it's lucky to be this high. There's just nothing to explore here. It's moving left to right, fighting enemies that are barely any different, with a slow process of loading through each gate and reading dialogue. It's a shame Sammer's Kingdom isn't more fleshed out, since this is an uncommon theme for Paper Mario. This one's barely trying, and feels blatantly incomplete. You don't even go to 6-3 or 6-4. The Duel of 100 ends up as a super challenge for post-game. And sure, it works for that. Fans of Super often let this chapter coast on premise alone, and while it's certainly novel with some cool moments, it's a complete travesty when it comes to gameplay and level design. Number 36, Super Paper Mario's Chapter 3, The Bitlins. Okay, this might be my first really controversial ranking. As a fan favorite chapter, the Bitlins are regularly looked at as one of the best from Super. But when breaking it down, I'm not impressed. Yes, we all get a kick out of the super nerd stereotype Francis and his absurd mocking of nerd culture. And I give that credit. He's one of the biggest highlights of Super Paper Mario, and the greatest reason this chapter's looked back on so fondly. But that's the thing. If you took him and the references surrounding him out, there's not much left here to really care about. Let's break it down. The Bitlins are first, a fine enough starting area kind of referencing the original Super Mario Bros., with a unique pixelated look to give this and the following levels a unifying identity. To be honest though, referencing Super Mario Bros. Was stale even when this game came out. Cute idea, but not exactly original. The best thing about this place is the random Koopa Troopa who grabs a power-up for himself. You also meet an optional pixel here named Barry. He's one of the more likable pixels with the extremely useful ability to create barriers. The level ends with a fight against Bowser, a pathetic one at that, but it leads to him joining up as a party member. A nice change of pace since he's an antagonist in most Paper Mario games. The tile pool's next and one of the weakest areas since it's mostly underwater, though with that considered it could have been a lot worse. Still, underwater environments aren't fun to move through, but at least this one's short. One of the most useless pixels Thudley's picked up here, a one-note guy all about girth, offering a fairly unimpressive ground pound ability. The level finishes off with the most brain-dead fight against a big blooper you can imagine. It's super boring. The third level's the Dotwood Tree, which is okay as a platforming area, but time-consuming if you fall. For a giant tree, it doesn't make a strong impression. The boss fight against Dimentio is the only notable thing about it, although it's not much of a fight. Dimentio's a wonderful character, secretly scheming behind the scenes for his plans of domination. He's sort of a puppet master, and unsurprisingly a fan favorite thanks to his playful gesture design. Despite how underwhelming this level is, it's above average for Super. Finally, we arrive at the Nerd Joke Palace Fort Francis. This place could certainly be bigger, but it has a solid layout, charming robot meow maids, and loads of references to the first two Paper Mario titles. Carrie's picked up here, a friendly pixel who grants the hovering platform ability so combat's permanently broken beyond repair. Confronting Francis needs no introduction. This dating simulation sequence is one of the best parts of the entire game. They put a good amount of effort into this, and getting to choose Peach's responses leads to a ton of hilarious discussions and reactions. It's a superbly memorable inclusion. The fight itself against Francis is unsurprisingly disappointing. Jump on him when he appears. A bit too simple for this far into the game, but at least the soundtrack's fitting. This chapter is beloved for Francis and the humor his identity provides. A massive nerd is not something you see a lot in games, and it's easy to feel in on the joke if you've ever been involved in a gaming fandom. Outside of him though, the biggest strength of this chapter is its variety. Each area is very different from each other with different ways of progressing and their own boss fights. I just wish they were more enjoyable to actually play through. They're cobbled together without much cohesion, but to be real, this inelegance is a problem for most of Super Paper Mario. And we're already over halfway through its chapters. The Bitlins landed in the better half thanks to a fresh antagonist, but its otherwise unremarkable areas leave something to be desired. Number 35, Super Paper Mario's Chapter 7, The Underwear and the Over There. I'm not picking on this game, I swear. I hoped this chapter would place higher, but after my most recent revisit and the absolute truckload of terrible design choices bogging it down, I feel generous even putting it this high. It commits a lot of Super's most egregious sins: clunky level design, thinly veiled fetch quests, and constant interruptions and drawn-out ramblings, ultimately amounting to a chapter made up of running around confusing levels and talking. So why is it this high at all? Because of the concept and Love Bee. I don't think anywhere else in the entire Mario franchise is there an adaptation of Heaven and Hell, where everyone goes when their games are over, as well as some references to Greek mythology. This is one of the most out there settings the series has ever tried, one I have a hard time seeing them do today. The distinct look and style, it's just such a fun theme. Even more delightful is how this place is introduced, waking up here after a fake-out assassination by Dementio. It's an effective setup since your friends are gone. On all accounts, there's no reason to believe Dementio didn't actually kill you. It's hard to know what's going on, which makes it all the more exciting. This is also where you finally pick up Luigi as the last playable partner in the game, and surprisingly the only time Luigi's playable in the whole Paper Mario series. I like how important he feels in Super, even showing bravery a few times, which you don't see too often. This chapter's framed around escorting the Underwear Queen's daughter, Love Bee, to the Over There. I love Love Bee for her patronizingly hilarious tongue. I'm a sucker for authenticity, and man is she vicious towards Mario, and especially Tippy. Underwear Road's the second level, where things immediately come crashing down. This place is a struggle to get through, constantly interrupting you with random questionnaires and long-winded babbling. Super does this kind of thing a lot, filling time and space with fluff as opposed to actually making a worthwhile level. The platforming's rudimentary at best and trolly at worst. It's a completely unfun place to explore, and believe me, you'll be spending a lot of time exploring thanks to the hags, two of which send you to earlier in the level so you have to make your way through it again. It's insanely unapologetic padding. The third hag doesn't send you on a fetch quest, but tells you a long love story you get nothing for bothering with. Fucking miserable. There's another pointlessly easy fight against Bowser here as well, because we're padding for time, remember? The Underchomp fight's the only worthwhile thing here, and even then, it has more to do with the presentation than the actual execution. It's memorable for playing out like an old-school RPG, but Piccolo trivializes the entire fight since you can keep the chomps permanently asleep. Nice attempt at something creative, but nowhere near enough to salvage an awful section of the game, and it's not about to get better. Before we move on though, let's take a moment to talk about Piccolo. She's an optional pixel involved in a notorious fetch quest that's just talking to characters in different places, one after another. While I like her design, she barely has any functionality, and can be quite loathsome for how pointlessly time-consuming it is to get her. The Over There Stairs, the third level, and another disaster. I normally like sky-themed locations, but everything here looks the same. Clouds and sky with structures scattered about, and it's a big place so it's easy to get lost. The mind-numbing music will have you begging for it to end. So how great then that this one also has a gimmick that wastes your time, searching for the correct apple to wake up Peach. This leads to a lot of running around identical looking environments, with a lot of boring platforming, until finally giving her the right one. And afterwards, what do you know, you meet a Cloud who wants an apple. So it's back to the orchards until you find the right one for the job. Between this and Underwear Road, Chapter 7 is overflowing with filler. The Over There's the final area, and graciously a step up, with an interesting plotline as the temples are beset by fiends. There's a fair amount of running around here, but it's a much easier place to navigate. The chapter boss, Bone Chill, attacks with... oh wait, he's already dead. This thing has a cool design, but man, this fight is woefully inadequate for so late into the game. Luigi thrashes him in an instant. The final scene where Love Bee learns that she's the Pure Heart's really well done, showing the relationship between her and her parents. It's easy to sympathize with her situation, for a tastefully somber ending. Sadly, post-game reveals Love Bee came back with no attempt at any reasoning. crushing the emotional moment. Thankfully, most players will miss this little addendum, but I also just announced it. Like a lot of Super's chapters, this isn't an easy one to rank. 7-2 and 7-3 are some of the worst parts of the whole game, and exhausting to get through. But the initial introduction to the underwear and overarching narrative with Loveby are some of the best moments from the game, and the chapter benefits a lot from its unique concepts. When you really break it down, it's lucky to place this high, but novelty can go a long way. It's a shame this concept is wasted on Super's gameplay, because the same setup done in a more traditional Paper Mario style could have been one of the strongest chapters in the series. Number 34, The Thousand Year Doors Chapter 7, Mario Shoots the Moon. Looks like we're in a string of uneven chapters. Let's talk about what works first, easily summed up as the X-Naut Fortress. This is the strongest of the dungeon-esque areas in the Thousand Year Door. It's a pretty sizable place and satisfying to work your way around since it has some non-linearity, something this game would benefit more from. It's also very gameplay focused, without a lot of interruptions. On top of that, a moon-based is a novel setting and also hosts to the best music track in the game, but it's not perfect. Lord Crump serves as the chapter boss in a stronger version of the Magnus von Grapple from Chapter 2. Crump fails completely at being interesting, but thankfully the fight works well enough. I'm a sucker for incorporating the audience into the show, but I doubt they're having the best time. So far things are looking good, but that's pretty much where the positives end. Far Outpost is such a shame. I'm certainly a fan of the snowy aesthetic, an uncommon one for the series, but honestly, if you took out this whole section, you wouldn't be losing much. To start, there's not much to explore here. This is a typical Thousand Year Door example of linear hallway design, with almost no substance and a town you barely spent 5 minutes in. And why is that? Because the cannon isn't running, bringing me to the infamous General White backtracking session. Rightfully well known for how forced it is. Hope you enjoy visiting nearly every major location and talking to specific NPCs only to learn where the old Bob-ombs run off to next. It really only takes about 10 to 15 minutes, but it's alarmingly desperate padding with no respect for the player's time. When you finally meet up with him, go figure, in the very place you started, he's asleep, so it's time to tediously mash through pointless text boxes until he wakes up. This is an obnoxious sequence the game's trying to get away with under the guise of, isn't it funny how he's always not where you are? Yeah, super funny. Congratulations, you got this chapter ranked a whole lot lower. A Bob-omb Society could have been such a classic, but they do almost nothing with it. You're blasted out of a cannon to another miserable location, the moon. It's kind of cool to be here at first, but that wears off fast as you realize how absurdly slow Mario moves up here. It's also super boring to explore and littered with clingy enemies. Yoshi helps, but not enough. It's a fairly dismal inclusion, but thankfully doesn't last long. Once you're in the fortress, the chapter's good to go, but man does everything before that tear it down. This is one of the few chapters in the Thousand Year Door where more time is spent actually playing the game than reading dialogue, which is nice, but the parts that do include dialogue are long-winded jokes at the expense of the player and nothing more. This chapter basically doesn't have a story, a rarity in the earlier titles, and ends up being the shortest Crystal Star chapter because of that. It ranks this highly thanks to the X-Naut Fortress and some of its concepts. Without them, this would be one of the weakest chapters in the whole series. Number 33, Paper Mario's Chapter 8, A Star-Powered Showdown. The first entry from the original Paper Mario, and like most finales, it's the weakest chapter from its respective game. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing especially problematic here. It's a serviceable final area to the adventure, but it's a bit underwhelming compared to the rest of the game. This is a very average ending. After rescuing the 7 star spirits, you head to Star Haven, which is a cool place place, but really just a stepping stone to Bowser's castle. Now let's talk about an unnecessarily long dungeon. I have no issues with a big dungeon, as long as there's meat on the bones, but the problem here is the quality of the meat. It has a few clever puzzles, but most of them are use the partner on the thing the partner is used for. Blow up a wall, shoot Cooper at a switch, light the darkness, ride over lava, blah blah blah. You'd think the environmental design would be a bit more involved by now, but some of this feels like padding, especially with how many enemies are running around. Junior Troopa's appearance is the best part, where he takes out the Koopa brothers so you have to fight him instead. It's a wonderful payoff to his running gag of seeking revenge. A shame though how little else manages to stand out about this place. There's this one part where you come across a Peach imposter that had potential, but is completely wasted since it's immediately apparent it's not really her. This could have been a cool sequence if they actually tried to trick you, but the presentation makes it obvious right away that it's a fake. If you weren't going to try and actually sell me on the fake out, why'd you even bother? Once you're at Peach's castle, the ending plays out nice enough, but very predictably. The lead up to the final battle's especially uninspired. You just enter a hallway and there's Bowser with Peach tied up in ropes. The final battle on the roof's fairly easy, especially if you brought items. My favorite thing about it's actually Twink's fight against Kammy Koopa, which while scripted, is an endearing capstone for this adorable little star's storyline. Otherwise, I don't know. After such a long adventure, it feels like something's lacking from this final sequence. There's no surprise, no flair. It's a fine ending, but very run-of-the-mill. Bowser's portrayed as far too incompetent to feel like any kind of threat, so he struggles to make an impact. I will shout out the ending castle party showing characters from throughout the adventure. It's a simple crowd pleaser, as well as the colorful parade to follow. This is a very warm ending, but the majority of the chapter feels uninspired, and isn't much fun to actually play through. Of all the chapters from the original game, it's the one I look forward to the least, but I guess it's easy to say that considering it's the last one. Looking at it overall, it's an adequate, if unspectacular, ending, and fitting for the lighthearted tone of the original Paper Mario. Number 32, Paper Mario's Prologue, A Plea from the Stars. As conceptually generic as the original Paper Mario is, this is one of the better openings in the series. Decidedly traditional, but still one of the best. Bowser's the main antagonist, he has a castle, he kidnaps Peach, it's the RPG equivalent of the standard Mario story. But with that considered, it's executed effectively. Heading to the castle for a party sets a comfortable tone at the start, and even introduces characters who will become more relevant throughout the adventure. There's a warmth here that I really like about the intro, and you feel Mario's special relationship with Peach, which creates a nice tonal shift when Bowser tears her castle straight out of Toad Town. His confident beatdown of Mario with the Star Rod paints a bleakness that does make you wonder, how is Mario going to stop him when he has something that can grant his every wish? It's a great intro for drawing you into the story, then the chapter slams the brakes. This is a prologue, remember, and does everything it needs to do to get the game going. Brief tutorials on how things work, laying out the main quest of the game, getting your first partner, all that stuff. But because of that, it can be a little boring, throwing all urgency out the window and replacing it with a lot of reading and hand-holding. The change of pace is very noticeable, so motivation can start to wane early on. None of this stuff is bad, it's a solid easing into what the game expects of you. The Goomba Village is charming, Goombario's unquestionably the standout partner of the first game if we're talking depth, but he is the tattler, so that's kind of inevitable. The Goomba King's our boss. There's not much to say about him, he's your typical full of himself but pretty weak early boss. The fight might as well be a tutorial with how much of a joke it is, but you barely have any options at this point, so you'd have to go out of your way to lose these battles. I'm not complaining that they're easy, but I do think the early combat being so bare bones is one of the reasons this chapter can be so dull. Despite the slow pace, prologues exist so that the rest of the game can move more smoothly. The initial scenes here are fantastic as an introduction, and everything's laid out well so you're prepped for the adventure ahead. So even though this one's markedly basic, it's one of the most effective openings in the series. Number 31, Color Splash's Chapter 6, Road to the Green Big Paint Star. Our first full-length Color Splash chapter, and undoubtedly the weakest of the 6. That's not to say it's without good ideas, and truthfully, nothing here is problematic. It's just unimpressive for Color Splash, which is noticeable since it's the last chapter before the finale. The game's creativity is starting to wear out at this point, and with the exception of the green energy plant, these are some of the most forgettable levels in this game. On top of lacking any kind of connective tissue, it also feels very brief. Red Pepper Volcano and Red Pepper Crater started off, and I'm listing them together because they may as well be the same level. Neither of them are long, they have identical atmospheres and enemies, and pretty much no narrative. As places to explore, they're fine, but little about them makes an impression. Riding Dragodon's a cute novelty, and there is a boss fight against a big lava bubble, but it's nothing special. Since you only go to these areas just to get the hairdryer, they couldn't feel more like filler. Afterwards is a quick revisit to the Sacred Forest where you fight Kamek. This is his only extensive interaction with Mario in this game, so he has a fair amount of dialogue here, but it's at least entertaining. His fight's not the best since he's up to his usual tricks, which can waste resources, and it's also very scripted, so you can't get away with overpowered strategies. The green energy plant's the next level, and a famous one as a visually faithful throwback to Super Mario Bros. 3. It even includes a Super Paper Mario-esque gimmick about twisting the perspective to explore in 3D. I'll give this level credit for its originality, but I'm actually not that impressed. Referencing older Mario games is nothing new, and as a level, it's pretty dang tedious since they also included a Super Paper Mario-esque timer for the 3D effect, making it time-consuming to play through. That's enough to drag it down for me, but otherwise, not much is done with the concept. The recorder reference is appreciated, but Goombas are the only throwback enemy here. The nostalgia attempt just feels half-hearted, like they knew it would be praised just for being included. But what can I say? It's still the standout level of this chapter. Moss Rock Theater is next, and we're back to unremarkable. There's very little to this place. It's almost entirely made up of enemy spam, and they even included 3 mini paint stars for multiple playthroughs. The foggy atmosphere is nice at least, and this place does lay breadcrumbs for the final area, with circus performers and posters. The Emerald Circus is the final level, and a very small one, really just offering a circus tent, which is in fact the only time the entire Paper Mario series has used a circus theme. You end up fighting all sorts of wacky enemies on stage to put on a show. It's a nice motif, if a little simplistic, but hey, it's caught Yoshi's for a change. All that's left is the boss Koopaling Lemmy, with the personality of an entertainer. One he's well suited to. A shame how limited his screen time is, since he has a lot of fun messing with Mario. The battle atop the circus tent's a great setting backed by a playful track. This is a solid fight, although an easy one to mess up by using the ice pick prematurely. Afterwards, everything wraps up immediately. Not much stands out about this chapter. These are perfectly adequate levels, but that's kind of all they are. Adequate. Fine enough to explore with some good humor and fun ideas. But with one exception, they fail to make a lasting impression. Color Splash's 4th and 5th areas have an overarching focus, so the fact that this one doesn't stands out. Lemmy's a nice payoff, but it ends up feeling underdeveloped and unspectacular. Number 30, The Thousand Year Doors Chapter 2, The Great Boggly Tree. You were probably expecting to see this show up earlier. This chapter is regularly looked at as one of the weakest in the Thousand Year Door. It's not a bad time, but the slow pacing and dream-like environment, although visually enchanting, wears you down the more time you spend in it. There's something about the aesthetic that just saps your strength, which can make it feel like a struggle to get through. It doesn't help that it's placed as the second chapter of this game. This is another one I wouldn't be surprised to see players drop the game at. Between the sporadic backtracking, and escorting punies, if you run out of patience here, it's going to be a rough time. On top of that, it also has a lot of scenes and interruptions, so the exploration's constantly being broken up. The black and white forest is at least a very unique setting. Being inside the tree has a pleasant, otherworldly feeling to it, which is very distinct. The quest to help the punies retake their tree is a good one, and framed well. The fact that they actually contribute to the cause is a smart decision so you don't grow to loathe them. Maybe you will anyway, but I like that they're doing their best. The Jabbies are a half-baked inclusion, particularly the fact that you can recruit one of them, which doesn't affect anything. I also don't care for these brawls between the two tribes. Narratively, it's a fine enough chapter, with a nice step-by-step progression in retaking the tree. I especially like that the goal is to descend within the tree when so often giant trees have you aiming for the top. Lord Crump's fine as the primary boss. He's not at all fleshed out, but at least establishes the X-Nauts as the main antagonists early on, while creating some history between them and Mario. The boss fight against Magnus von Grapple's pretty lame. The robot design's solid, but the fight's a little too easy for this point in the game, though that's a recurring problem in the Thousand Year Door. This chapter also introduces the most undesirable Thousand Year Door partner, Madame Flurry. She's not exactly offensive, but her reason for joining Mario's weak, and I don't care for most of her battle abilities. She feels included for the sake of having another partner, which is even more evident by how forced her on-field ability is. Funny that Vivian's also introduced here, one of the best partners in the series, and far more appealing. They do a great job setting up her toxic relationship with her sisters, so you're quickly endeared to her situation. That about does it for this chapter, though. It doesn't have big problems. The escorting and backtracking isn't even that bad, it's just boring. I like how unique the setting is, and the plight of the charming punies, but it's hard to deny how dull this one can be to play through. It's a hump to get over whenever I replay this game, but once it's over, a slew of great chapters are lined up to cleanse the palate. Number 29, The Thousand Year Doors Chapter 1, Castle and Dragon. This one has a lot in common with the original Paper Mario's first chapter. They have similar settings and aesthetics. They both introduce a Koopa partner, and neither has much of a story outside of something terrorizing the area, operating out of a large building with traps. This one's more inspired, but it also has problems that one doesn't. Too many interruptions when you just want to stretch your legs, after a prologue that's almost entirely dialogue. Most chapters from the earlier Paper Mario games have a fair amount of text, but this one has a bit too much for my tastes. Hooktail's castle's a bit more freeing, but even then it has a fair amount of cutscenes and rants introducing characters and plot points. A lot of this is expected for a chapter 1, but playing through it feels like a prerequisite to get to the real game, and having limited combat abilities makes that even more noticeable since it always plays out the same. Let's break the areas down. Petal Meadows is small and pretty empty. Petalburg's also tiny without much to it, but it's a cute place and talking with Mayor Kroop's entertaining. Schwank Fortress is okay. The Quirk Quiz is notable for how random it is, but the questions are so easy it almost feels added to increase playtime. Hooktail Castle has an impressive scale, but like I said, is a little too stop and go for my tastes. And I'm not a fan of the track that plays here either. The puzzles are standard, but Koops' hold function makes them a little more interesting. Hooktail's a nice design for a paper dragon, and the battle itself benefits from the build-up. Utilizing the Attack FX badge to make cricket noises that make Hooktail sick is rewarding to figure out, and the moment where she literally eats part of the audience is a fun way to get meta. The fight's a little chatty though. The partner introduced here, Koops, is just okay. He's likable, but nothing special. He certainly has more development than Paper Mario's Cooper, but I've always found him quite dull. And everything surrounding his dad disappearing and living in Hooktail's stomach for 10 years is just total nonsense. I can't say any of this works on an emotional level. Koops is alright in battle. Like Goombella, he's very straightforward, but not the most flexible. Miss Mouse is also introduced in this chapter, and she's a compelling character early on. It's a shame she isn't fleshed out more, but it's cool to see a partner from a rarely showcased species. And setting her up early helps the world feel more active. She's the most useless partner when it comes to attacking, but her overworld skills incredibly useful. You can probably tell this chapter isn't a favorite of mine, but I wouldn't say there's much wrong with it. Since it's so early, there's not a lot of freedom when it comes to combat, and too much time spent reading. But it's still a solid first chapter, and a good start to the adventure. Though I'd be lying if I said I looked forward to it on replays. Number 28, The Origami Kings Chapter 6, The Origami Castle. It took some time for the last game to debut in the ranking, and would you look at that, it's another finale chapter. As far as endings go, this one gets some important things right, but also some important things wrong. This is a short finale for a big game like The Origami King. It breezes on by because it never stops moving through set pieces, until before you know it, the game's over. To start, you're thrust into endgame right after completing Chapter 5, hopping aboard Bowser's airship and mowing down paper airplanes in an original sequence that's thankfully not too demanding. Hotfoot Crater follows, an exciting yet short sequence to see Comic and Bowser Jr. on their way before hitting Peach's castle, which is almost immediately turned into the Origami Castle, a gnarly looking place, both inside and out, with a superbly grandiose track for an endgame environment. Since everything here is made out of origami, it's an unnatural place, but that's what makes it interesting. Unfortunately, it's a very short experience. This is the final dungeon in a big game. Ideally, it'd be roughly double the size it is now, and that's another reason it feels like the game's flooring it to the finale. Stapler's easily the highlight. A hilarious Legion of Stationery member whose entire personality is dog. It doesn't talk, has an incredible battle theme, and a really engaging battle where positioning and move choice causes it to waste varying amounts of staples. It's a fun gimmick to work with in a fight that doesn't pull punches, making this battle just beat out Scissors as the best boss fight in the Origami King. All that's left is the final confrontation with Ollie, which brings me to one of my biggest issues with this game's ending, Ollie's motivation. He's less interesting than he first appears, since he's entirely fueled by blind rage at his creator for scribbling something on his body, making Ollie so upset he wants to eradicate all toads. What makes this especially stupid is he doesn't even know what the message says until after he's defeated. The excuse for this entire game is something as trivial as a message written on his body and he doesn't even know what it says. And what a surprise, it's well wishes. It's hard to take this seriously, and a shame to see Ollie's character fall apart right at the end. He even instantly regrets his actions after he learns what the message says, changing his tune in an instant and undermining the whole story. His 3 battles aren't much fun either. In the first, he transforms into different Vellumentals, and it bottles down to using a sensible counter. This can either be a short fight or a grueling one, depending on if you make the right decisions. The Paper Sumo battle's better. I love that Bowser plays an active role in this fight, seeing as how affected he was by Ollie's actions. Bowser's actually really cool in this game, even considering he's a paper food container for most of it. He takes pride in being a parent to Bowser Jr., makes several competent decisions in tight spots, is the reason Mario gets to the castle at all, and has a powerhouse showdown with Ollie. They really gave him a proper showing after Sticker Star and Color Splash didn't. The last phase involves putting together a magic circle for one last hurrah with the dismal ring system. It's a cheap opportunity for an easy game over, but it has a nice visual spectacle, and turning Olivia into a giant hammer's an adorable final attack. Despite my complaints about Ollie, the ending works okay. Olivia's sacrifice, while formulaic, is at least believable, and not overly dramatic. It doesn't quite have the same effect as Bob-omb's sacrifice, but since they try really hard to make you like Olivia, you'll likely be moved at least a little bit. Afterwards is a bittersweet epilogue to wrap things up. Simple and satisfying. As an ending chapter, this one's over so fast. It's like the game can't wait to wrap things up, even though you just got done unwrapping things. Aside from Stapler, the battles are also disappointing, since they're all very gimmicky. You barely even touch any of your standard weapons or items, so it doesn't feel like your growth mattered in the end. The chapter has energized set pieces and fun moments, but the stuff in between feels too shallow and unchallenging for endgame, and the narrative doesn't nail the landing either. For how much the climax is built up, it's lacking. It isn't enough of a payoff when held against the rest of the game. As is, it's surprising it manages to be a fulfilling ending. But in any case, if this is the low point of the Origami King, just wait until we get to its best chapters. Number 27, Sticker Stars Chapter 3, World 3, The Forest. Everyone's favorite Sticker Star's back, with one of the most infamous chapters in the series. But, as you can see by this ranking, I don't agree with the consensus. This chapter is not given enough credit, and it has to do with Sticker Star's overall problems. We all know this game's loathed by the fanbase, not only for stepping away from what the series used to be about, but also for making plenty of poor design choices on its own. Check out the best and worst of Paper Mario Sticker Star for more of my thoughts on this. But how exactly does this affect World 3? When this chapter starts, between the growing frustration of a stripped down Paper Mario experience, and also coming off the heels of a somewhat obtuse World 2, there's a very good chance your patience is gone at this point, which can color this chapter, making it something you just want to get over with. But that outlook will guarantee a miserable time. People complain about getting lost, but that only happens if you're missing things because you're trying to rush. And interesting ideas like having your resources taken from you are looked at as frustrating because, again, you just want to get the game over with. Yes, this is the longest chapter in the game, and it's not close, but each level presents its own challenges, so why is that a problem? Yes, you have to hunt down Wiggler segments. Framing it this way can make it sound like a chore, but it doesn't change much about how you'd be moving through levels anyway. It even provides a more stable reason to go to these places. Yes, there's poison all over the place. It's a hazard and punishment for messing up your platforming, and can largely be avoided. Yes, there is some backtracking, but it doesn't take long, and isn't as tedious as some of the things other Paper Mario games make you do. I get it. It's easy to be so fed up with Sticker Star's design choices at this point that you just want to get through the game. And because this is a long chapter with repetitive visuals, and a quest to track down Wiggler segments, it feels like a slog. But to me, this is the most interesting, overarching concept in Sticker Star, both in creativity and narrative. Wiggler's one of the few characters in this game who isn't a toad and has an actual personality. He even pays back the favor and helps Mario twice. Just like Squirps, he has a childlike innocence that makes him likable, and he even lives in a cool treehouse. This chapter was basically built around him, and that was a great decision. As for the levels, I'm not going to cover all of them since most are forest paths with poison, but they're each built around a different set piece that asks for clever thinking to find your way through. As a Lost Woods kind of level, the Bafflewood isn't fun, but at least it's short. Rustleboro splits Mario and Kirsty up, and also takes your hammer and stickers away so you have to hunt them down. Using what you can to sequentially progress is a creative change of pace. Stumpglade's a well-known highlight, hosting the Sniff It or Whiff It game show with wacky minigames. It's mostly a lot of talking, and the challenges are pretty brain-dead, but it's a worthy inclusion for the novelty. All that's left is the boss, Gooper Blooper. Aside from the usual Sticker Star boss fight flaws, this is one of the best in the game thanks to its fun presentation. Gooper Blooper moves in rhythm to a nice music track. sponge is also one of the most sensible weaknesses to figure out. But what I really appreciate about Gooper Blooper is that he's the cause of the poison in the forest. Unlike most bosses in this game, he's directly at fault for a problem present throughout the whole chapter. So taking him down is meaningful. It's true he doesn't have any character, but not all bosses need one. As long as he's doing it effectively, fulfilling the role of an unnatural disaster's more than enough. I understand why this chapter can be a bad time, especially on your first playthrough. It's a big world with plenty of opportunities to get stuck. But this one has several qualities none of the other Sticker Star chapters provide, so I'm happy to stand by it as the second best chapter from this game. Number 26, The Origami King's Prologue. We've come to the final ranked prologue, and dang, it got pretty high, didn't it? Well, that's kind of because what I consider Origami King's prologue. I could see arguing that this prologue ends when Mario's kicked out of Peach's castle, but I'm going a lot further than that, and considering everything up to leaving Toad Town as the prologue. Obviously, that gives this one quite the advantage over others. It's not far off from a typical chapter at this point, so unsurprisingly, it's the best prologue in the series. So, my reasons for why I think all this should be included. While these early areas are listed under the Red Streamer banner, the quest for the Red Streamer doesn't start until after the early game baggage is dealt with, and there's a fair amount of teaching throughout all this. So the parts I'm including are the initial sequence at Peach's castle, the Whispering Woods, Toad Town, and the Graffiti Underground. That's a lot to work with, but it does have some downsides. It starts with a fantastic scene setting up an unsettling atmosphere right away. The creepy confrontation with Origami Peach and subsequent time in the dungeon, watching Bowser's minions transform in the shadows, creates a really disturbing vibe, so you're absorbed in what's going on right away. It's here that you meet Olivia, a very vocal partner throughout the game. She's quirky and likable, but interjects way too much, so she's endearing, but exhausting. King Ollie has a nice introduction, followed by a beautiful cutscene where the castle's carried off in streamers. The Whispering Woods follows. A fairly typical forest with rudimentary puzzles, so you get used to gameplay. The only thing that really stands out here are the talking trees and Grand Sappy's song. It's a memorable moment setting the tone for the wacky adventure ahead. Otherwise, this place is a bit dull. The campground you pass through afterwards is a cute inclusion, and then you arrive at Toad Town proper. There's an appreciated unease here, thanks to how many paper macho soldiers are traipsing around, and the tense music piece helps sell it all further. Exploring the town's a lot of fun thanks to its inviting layout and interiors. The Graffiti Underground's last, a very small area with a handful of battles and not much else. It takes like 5 minutes to get through. After checking in with Luigi at the castle grounds, the quest to unravel the streamers begins in full force. This introduction's great at setting up the threat Ollie and his origami army present, and establishes Peach, Bowser, and Luigi early. You also get a thorough feel for Olivia's personality, and what the gameplay expects of you. Unfortunately though, the sheer amount of tutorializing and interruptions drag this one down. Olivia talks very often. Even compared to other Paper Mario titles, this one just feels so handholdy. The game even walks you through basic combat twice, and the pace is constantly being broken up by Olivia unnecessarily pointing things out. I know every game is someone's first, but do we really need her explaining what items are? Because of this, it ends up being a very slow start to this game. One that can easily take more than a few hours if you're taking your time. There's an impressive amount of creativity here for a prologue, but the pacing can be tiring, and despite covering so many locations, it doesn't have any boss fights. This is still a well-done introduction, ranked now as the best in the series, but some much appreciated streamlining would make it a better time to play through. Number 25, Sticker Stars Chapter 4, World 4, The Snowlands. We've come to our first game elimination, with the last remaining chapter from Sticker Star. It's amazing how much one good level can lift up an entire chapter. The Enig Mansion's well known as the best level from this game, and it's enough to prop up the fourth world all on its own. But that's not all there is to appreciate. It's no secret I'm a huge fan of snow themes, especially in Paper Mario. And this one grabs your attention right away with its whimsically catchy track. Snow Rise is the first level, an adequate but fairly typical snow area. The snow spikes can be annoying, but it's a good start, and even introduces Birdo to the series. Ice Flow's next and kind of phoned in. It's a short level with a focus on slippery surfaces. It's not bad, but it's certainly underwhelming. Skipping the Enig Mansion, we have Whiteout Valley, which is almost entirely spent sitting on a ski lift, rocking back and forth to avoid enemies. It's a unique set piece, but pretty cruddy as an actual level, and feels completely like filler. The boss level's Bowser's Snow Fort. This is a cool one when you first arrive. Seeing all these Shy Guys line up for an attraction's charming, and you can even use a secret door as a fast pass to skip the line. Unfortunately, this is another area ruined by gimmicky gameplay, since it's mostly riding a rail cart through caves. I appreciate the attempt at something different, but this simply isn't fun to play, and it's enough to tear down the final area on its own. Mr. Blizzard's the boss here, and undoubtedly the most interesting antagonist in Sticker Star because he actually has a motivation, and a sympathetic one at that. He comes and goes awfully quickly, to the point where it's almost played for laughs, but he remains a memorable part of the game for having a little taste of classic Paper Mario identity. The fight itself's really basic. Spam fire until it goes down, but it's at least a bit more lenient than the usual Sticker Star boss on what you can use. Oh, and who could forget the Shaved Ice Cave? Literally a one-room shop you're lucky to spend more than 2 minutes in. From what I've covered so far, World 4 is not looking too impressive. But here's where the Enig Mansion comes in. A mansion in the snow-blown mountains where you have to hunt down and seal away a horde of mischievous boos. This place sets up a nice atmosphere upon arrival. Haunted mansions are an easy crowd pleaser, and this one's pretty involved. There's a lot to explore here, and several boos can be tricky to track down, but the puzzles get you thinking, so it's a fun mission you can really get into. This mansion can easily take over an hour to complete, making up a fair amount of this world's length, since most of these other levels are short. There's a boss fight against a big boo here too, which can be annoying if you don't have an appropriate sticker to turn off the candles, but it can be beaten surprisingly quickly if you're prepared. Comic also shows up here, and there are even some bookshelves fleshing out the world a bit. These kind of things help this place stand out, and make it feel closer to the classic Paper Mario level of detail. Tremendously reduced when it comes to creativity, but inspired when compared to the rest of this game. Maybe I'm giving it too much credit, but this is the best level in Sticker Star, and it's enough to land this chapter as the best in the game. What this chapter lacks for consistency, it makes up for with wintry charm. It's far from perfect, but for this game, it's a pretty breezy time. That does it for the final entry from Sticker Star, and while I'm sure some people won't agree with any chapter from this game getting such a high placement, Sticker Star has levels worth appreciating. Its overall flaws and lack of creativity make it unsurprising as the first game out, but even so, a few chapters ranked well enough to show it's not entirely without value. Number 24, Color Splash's Chapter 2, Road to the Yellow Big Paint Star. This is one of the more nebulous Color Splash chapters, with the only connective tissue being a silly relationship between a Toad Professor and his pet chain chomp princess. This selection of levels is on the less memorable side for Color Splash, so I don't blame you if you can't really envision it as a whole. Sunglow Ridge is a great start. This is a pleasant environment with solid exploration and a nice music track backing it up. The black paint missile bombing's the only notable thing here, showing the threat of black paint directly. I like that they introduced this stuff early on, but the danger it poses is undermined by how quickly Huey takes care of it. It helps set up his inevitable sacrifice, but this threat would have benefited by not being dealt with seemingly effortlessly. Chateau Chanterelle's next, and while not much of a level, it serves as the hub of this chapter's central focus. The professor's obsession over his enormous pet princess leads to a lot of funny moments, and figuring out how to reunite them's a creative motif. Mondo Woods follows, and while a massive forest is a cool idea, this place actually doesn't do much for me. It's adequate, but big Goombas are the only enemies here, and the layout's kind of unfocused. The giant coin's a nice bit, but otherwise, it doesn't do much with the concept. Marmalade Valley's a step up. This is a big area with an intricate layout. Earthquakes happen on and off here until Princess shows up for a chase down. These chases are awesome set pieces, but a little easy to mess up, which can lead to trivial game overs and sour your opinion of this section dramatically. This background track's also pretty grating. I've never been a fan of the harmonica, and it plays in way too many levels throughout this game. Kiwano Temple's next, and not only the low point of the chapter, but one of the worst levels in Color Splash. It's a shame since the ancient temple aesthetic's an appealing one, and at first glance it doesn't look too bad, but four things drag it down. First, it has a fair amount of enemies, a few of which are hard to ignore. Second, moving around with these octagonal platforms is tedious and dull. Third, it features a moving platform sequence where you have to dodge rocks without any warning. It's easy to get a game over here because you have no way of knowing where they'll pop up in advance. Fourth, this level has 2 mini paint stars right at the end, meaning you have to play through it twice, enhancing all of the other weaknesses. It's one of the few levels in Color Splash that feels like a chore to get through. And the boss fight against a big Spinies completely forgettable. What was I talking about? Thankfully, the final level, the Golden Coliseum's a considerable improvement. This is an intricate, energized location that feels believable, and shows wonderful characterization for basic enemies. Working your way around to find the all-too-important bone for the boss fight's engaging, and using a superstar to blitz the Coliseum match is very empowering. Iggy's the boss Koopaling, a chariot-riding Coliseum champion which... wait, they used Iggy for this? It's not that he can't work in the role. His smugness and focus on contraptions is appropriate, but placing him in this setting does feel a little off. His dialogue's entertaining enough, but his presence is very brief. He doesn't make a very strong impression, and neither does the battle. I do like how it rounds out the chapter by bringing Princess back as his foil, but there's not much to it. This series of areas is all over the place. The levels are a bit hit or miss, and even though it doesn't have many weaknesses, it lacks a strong identity, and ends up feeling unremarkable. It's still fun to play through, and several of its smaller moments are some of the most memorable the game has to offer. And what do you know, we're officially over the halfway mark in the rankings. Some games have certainly been showing up more than others, but we're shifting into the better half of Paper Mario chapters now. A lot of the best stuff's yet to come, so let's continue this journey all the way to the very top of what this series has to offer. Number 23, Paper Mario's Chapter 1, Storming Koopa Brothers' Fortress. Following a conventional prologue is Paper Mario's equally conventional Chapter 1, which makes good use of its basic themes. Despite how run-of-the-mill it is, it's a nicely executed scenario, and the Koopa Brothers are the main reason why. But let's talk partners first. You get two here, Cooper and Bombette, and neither of them have much going on. To be fair, most of the partners in the original Paper Mario are very one-dimensional, without much backstory. But Cooper just wants to be an explorer, and Bombette is strong-willed, and that's it. They're both likable, but good lord are they basic. And both their field and battle abilities follow suit. The attention missing from them seems to have been given to the Koopa Brothers instead. They're not only a step up in personality from the Goomba King, but outside of Bowser and Tubba Blubba, they're the most present chapter bosses in this game, with a fair amount of scenes. scenes. Most other bosses don't even appear until right before their fight, so it's easy to appreciate how integrated they are. They're also pretty entertaining to watch, pulling all sorts of tricks along the way. They're introduced in a charismatic display to impress Bowser. A strong first impression, but they also disguise themselves as toads to block your path, and create a trap floor landing you in prison. And who could forget the paper-crafted Bowser the boss fight starts with? With so much time spent on their charm, it's no surprise they're fan favorites. Their boss battle's a pretty good check for this early on. They deal a good amount of damage if you don't strategize properly. It's designed well so you learn the importance of decision making, so this fight can either be a hassle or a breeze. And I can't forget to shout out their rowdy boss track. The fortress itself is a solid area. It's not very memorable, but typical for first dungeon expectations, with routine puzzles. It serves its role. The Koopa village is also pretty standard. It turns out Koopa Troopas aren't very interesting, but getting their shells back from a fuzzy invasion's a fun sequence. That's about all there is to this chapter though. It's not at all a long one. Like I said, it's distinctly basic, but it works with its themes well, for a solid if unexciting first chapter to the adventure. It's funny, this chapter really doesn't have many flaws, but a tame theme just can't stand up to more inspired concepts. Number 22, Super Paper Mario's Chapter 8, Castle Black. It's been a while since this game showed up. Most of Super's chapters have glaring weaknesses, but this one's a bit better. Don't misunderstand me though, this level design's nothing special, but it at least gets you thinking. The best thing about this chapter though is it actually presents a satisfying conclusion, at least story-wise. This is probably the most emotionally engaging ending in the series, and it manages this because it's about more than just stopping an evil villain from wreaking havoc on the world. A love story is at the center here, between Blumiere, calling himself Count Bleck, and Timpani, calling herself Tippy. Their history's told slowly over the course of the game, so it's exciting to finally see them confront each other. I'm getting ahead of myself though. Let's start with the lead up. The first 3 levels are fine. Castle Bleck looks cool, but these areas are all very similar. There's a lot of enemy spam here, and aesthetically it's very one-note, so it's not the most interesting place to explore. Party members each face off against one of Bleck's minions, and it's great to see their personalities clash for some fun banter. That each of them stay behind, kind of sacrificing themselves, is a smart build-up to the finale. Unsurprisingly though, these are very easy fights. The whole castle's easy. Enemies are just really simple to avoid or cheese in some way, and puzzles mostly boil down to flipping in the right spots. At the end is the long-awaited encounter with Count Bleck. I'm generally not a fan of villains who want to destroy everything out of anger. His relationship with Timpani's well presented, but he's not very sympathetic. Even so, he plays the role of main antagonist well, and I chalk this up to his appealing design and infectious enthusiasm. His fight's unfortunately pretty boring, since he moves around a lot and several of his attacks slow down the battle. It's a dull encounter for what's supposed to be the climax. Super Dimentio's the actual final boss though, a fusion between the Chaos Heart and Luigi to create a massive, delightfully disturbing Clown Luigi. This is the real final boss of the game, and unquestionably, the easiest final boss in the Paper Mario series. It's a shame because this deranged entity is so appropriate for the tone and scale of Super, but the combat system does not back it up, and Paper Mario's usually good about that. In any case, once defeated, a bittersweet ending plays out that finally sees Timpani and Blumiere reconcile. It's a touching ending, if a bit ambiguous, until the final shot after the credits, showing the couple living out their lives somewhere happily. Super's finale's more focused on this kind of stuff than on a brainless mastermind just wanting to destroy things. Some of that's still here, but focusing on a relationship makes it easier to relate to what's going on and get invested invested in it. But there's a downside to all this. Everyone else feels disconnected from this finale. Mario and friends come off as hired muscle, with no personal relevance to what's going on, more than anyone else would against a world-ending cataclysm. They're here because they were chosen to be, and are borderline irrelevant otherwise. So if you don't care about Timpani and Blumiere's relationship, this ending's not likely to work for you. I wish the main cast mattered more in some way. They could pretty much be anyone. Once the void's dealt with, the game ends before you know it, because there's nothing else to wrap up. Even with this considered, the conclusion works because the other characters are well expressed. So even though this is a short chapter, it's a good finale narratively. A bit overly dramatic, but it gets the job done. Now is probably a good time to bring up Dashel. This optional pixel's acquired by completing the flipside pit of 100 trials. He lets you move around really quickly, so he's phenomenally useful. Combining that with a sleek design and passionate personality, he's probably my favorite pixel of them all. Number 21, Paper Mario's Chapter 4, Trials in the Toy Box. Most of the chapters in the original Paper Mario follow a formula, usually involving a trip to a far-off place and delving into some kind of dungeon. And this one's special for not doing any of that. Toy themes aren't exactly common, even in the Mario series, so with this one taking place inside a colorful toy box with all sorts of moving parts and decorations, it makes a charming impression. But what's so unique about it is how it integrates Toad Town. After Chapter 3, upon returning to Toad Town, you're greeted to relentless Shy Guy chaos. They're causing havoc all over town, pilfering treasured possessions. An effective lead into the chapter that creates an inspired form of progression. Returning lost items allows townsfolk to use their individual abilities to overcome the obstacles in your path. It's a nice format for a chapter, but does come with some problems. Back and forth is inevitable with this one, but it's far from egregious backtracking, largely thanks to Mario's handy spin dash. The Shy Guys are wonderfully mischievous and add a lot to this chapter's distinct flavor. There's also a tremendous variety of them to battle. The boss, General Guy's a Shy Guy commander with a passion for combat. He has a great design and a particularly entertaining fight, with all sorts of battalions, as well as a sweet-looking tank. It's all very memorable, and a fitting challenge for this point in the game. The partner introduced here is Watt, a very cute little Sparky. While she's likable, her actual personality's almost non-existent. She's basically just a baby that wants to help, just beating out Bombette as the most underdeveloped partner in the original title. She's quite the beast in combat though, with some really useful moves. While it's mostly been praises so far, the unique way to progress through this chapter means it basically has no story. You arrive in town, realize the Shy Guys robbed everyone, get the items back, and fight the boss at the end. Outside of a brief encounter to free Watt, it's mostly running around and battling. Since it lacks a significant focus, the chapter ends up feeling pretty empty once it's over. While I do appreciate that not every chapter follows the same formula, it's hard to deny that the more narratively driven adventures are the ones that stick with you the most. Without that crucial element, this one feels a little incomplete, but I'm a sucker for this kind of off-the-wall theme. Shy Guy's Toy Box is a cute novelty, but without a greater meaning, it fails to be much more than an amusing diversion. Number 20, The Origami King's Chapter 1, The Red Streamer. Another Grassland Chapter 1, but thanks to some unique environments, it stands out from the others. Although a bit generic, there's a lot to do here, and most of these areas are compelling to explore. The Origami King's chapters are usually about figuring out how to get to the streamer, so they don't often revolve around much of a narrative. More so a series of small episodes. This one starts with the task to find the 4 shell stones to open up the Vellumental Temple. After defeating the Earth Vellumental, you infiltrate Overlook Tower, make your way to the top, and defeat the boss. It's a nice first motif for an adventure of this scale, and these locations have a lot to do. Picnic Road's the first area, and not especially notable as your standard Plains theme, but there's a lot to busy yourself with here. Overlook Mountain's better thanks to its more intricate layout, and this is also where you track down the shell stones in a variety of ways. The Earth Vellumental Temple's unexpectedly tame dungeon since it's so early, but the atmosphere is pretty good. The initial lead-ins set up like a tourist destination for Vellumental worshippers, which is very charming and even cleverly teaches you about the boss. The fight against the Earth Vellumental's not the best, since it's also the tutorial for boss battles and very basic and chatty. As a tutorial, it gets the job done, but the battle track's really what deserves credit. It has a fantastic energy to it and is graciously used for all 4 Vellumental bosses. The final setting's Overlook Tower. A tourist attraction's a novel concept. There's an interesting gimmick here where confetti's limited, so you have to figure out where to find more to keep moving upward. The restaurant sequence where you hunt down a tiny Goomba infestation's particularly memorable. It's nice to explore familiar locations like this since the relatability makes it easier to feel immersed. The outdoor cafe's another great sequence where you dodge colored pencil missiles. It's a great build up to the boss encounter against Jean-Pierre Colored Pencils the 12th. This is a cool boss for a lot of reasons. The artwork drawn around the tower creates suspense for what the boss actually is, and the elevator attack out of nowhere's a well-executed moment to sell the danger the Legion of Stationery poses. Unlike a lot of other bosses in the series, these objects aren't pulling their punches. Colored Pencils is strongly characterized as an artist with a bloated opinion of itself. Like pretty much every boss in the Origami King, it has a killer soundtrack. And the fight itself's interesting in that you have to avoid the targeted panels while turning its own firepower against it. It's a simple but very satisfying boss because of how much impact everything has to it. Also, shout out to multicolored text. There isn't really much going on in this chapter to warrant a high placement, but everything here works so well. Since it's so early in the game, naturally a lot of the puzzle solving and secret finding's rudimentary, but it's still fun to play, and the humorous writing does a lot to keep things entertaining. Make no mistake though, this is a very safe Chapter 1. The only thing really bringing it down is the usual ordinariness that comes with being up first. But with that considered, this one's really solid, even if it's nowhere near as creative as the chapters that follow. Number 19, The Thousand Year Doors Chapter 8, The Thousand Year Door. Here it is, the highest ranked final chapter in the series, and also the most well-rounded. That's not to say it's perfect though. On all accounts, this is a decent area for the Thousand Year Door, with a nice sense of atmosphere. It's exciting to finally go beyond the titled Thousand Year Door, but this place is actually pretty boring. While it has a fair amount of puzzles, they're a little too simple for endgame, and the palace itself is very random. It's not at all believable as a real location, and a lot of it feels like work to get through. The best area is the Tower of Riddles. This place is made up of 8 rooms with their own puzzles to solve. A fun idea, though a bit lacking since most of them are simple. It's more of the usual use the partner with the right ability kind of design. It's certainly the most memorable part of the palace though, with an appropriately mysterious track backing it up. This chapter doesn't hurt for boss fights, and the best part is they're not pushovers. Finally, after 7 chapters of being overpowered, you get to fight bosses that actually require some strategy. And they're the most satisfying in the game because of that. Gloomtail's a cool surprise, and a pretty good challenge on his own. The Shadow Sirens now include everyone's favorite doppelganger Dupless for another fun battle. Eventually you make it to Grotus, and a well-executed ending. Grotus isn't much better than Lord Crump, really just a power-hungry, irredeemable villain of the week, but the battle's a decent challenge. After he's beaten, you're immediately thrown into a boss fight against Bowser and Kammy Koopa, paying off their inclusion in the story at the perfect moment. And it only gets better with the Shadow Queen, Her eerie revival's a marvelous introduction to one of the coolest designs to come out of the Mario series. Just look at how freaky she is, exuding darkness and destruction. Small scenes play throughout this, showing darkened skies covering the world you've gotten to know. This makes her feel like a threat, and lends the finale a sense of importance and scale. She obliterates Grotus in one move for trying to tell her what to do. He pointlessly ends up alive after all this, but it's still immensely satisfying. After possessing Peach's body, as well as dragging the entire audience into darkness to absorb their souls, a series of scenes play out showing everyone from the earlier chapters sharing words of encouragement, creating an opening for Mario to take her down. This is typical cringe-worthy RPG embarrassment at its finest, which I'm usually not a fan of, but I'm a sucker for when it's done well, and this emotional track is great at gearing you up for the final fight. This is a pretty demanding battle. I wouldn't be surprised if it catches a lot of players off guard, just how much stronger the Shadow Queen is than anything else in the game. I'd even say she's more challenging than Bonetail. It's a memorable battle because it keeps you on your toes, and the dark visuals and gnarly track complete the atmosphere. The rest of the ending's pretty standard. You reunite with Peach, say goodbye to your partners, and have a nice, detailed epilogue showing what they're up to now. It's nothing crazy, but thorough enough for a nice sense of closure. The goodbyes from each party member are a particularly good inclusion. As an ending for a Paper Mario game, this one gets the most things right. The Palace of Shadow doesn't need to be as long as it is, but otherwise, this is a fulfilling ending, with satisfying battles, twists, and moments. Number 18, The Origami King's Chapter 4, The Purple Streamer. A great chapter when it comes to exploration, and a not so great one when it comes to storytelling. This one's set in a large open ocean, with all sorts of wacky islands and temples to explore. It's sandwiched between two fairly talkative chapters, so it's more focused on exploration. The Great Sea is pretty dang cool. It captures that seafaring motif like a mini Wind Waker. And thanks to a speedy boat, it's not a hassle to get around. This is one of the best portions of open exploration in this series. The game sort of leaves it to the player to find their way forward here, but that doesn't last as long as you'd think. It turns out this ocean doesn't have a lot to offer, since most islands are small with simple puzzles. I'd be lying if I said any of these islands were memorable. They just don't have much substance. Bonehead Island in particular is a letdown. I will give credit to dredging up sunken treasure as a charming activity that supports the set piece. Things get more interesting at Diamond Island, an underwater dome with 3 trials and the Ice Vellumental Mountain. The trials test your skills of power, wisdom, and courage, and even though the challenges are a bit arbitrary, not knowing what to expect makes them more fun to do. The Ice Mountain's the best of the 4 Vellumental temples, thanks to its stimulating ice sliding puzzles and a lovely aesthetic. The boss fight has some cool ideas, but can also be frustrating, asking for pretty specific responses in order to make a dent. It can feel especially trial and error. The Sea Tower's the only major location remaining, and as impressive as this place is from the outside, it ends up being a letdown. Wow, a giant tower that stretches so far into the sky I can't even see the top? I can't imagine how long it's going to take to beat this place. Oh, it's just a Vellumental Temple greatest hits. It's not a bad dungeon, really just a throwback to rooms from the other temples, but because of that, it doesn't have much of its own identity. It's also very short, which doesn't quite line up with how tall it looks from the outside. Topping it off is the boss fight against Tape, who has an old American gangster personality that couldn't be more on the nose looking at the writing. I'm not a fan of this archetype, but at least it's distinct. The battle itself's a good one, with another great track. and the taping gimmick pairs with the ring system well for a nice challenge. That's kind of it? Alright, not entirely. This chapter isn't completely without narrative, since I glossed over the section where you find Olivia's birth home and meet the origami craftsman. This part dishes out a fair amount of backstory about the grander plot, which helps the chapter so it's not completely barren of narrative, but it's very disconnected from everything around it, and realistically could have been placed in any chapter. Aside from this stuff, there's really nothing more to this chapter. Some of the chapters in this series have strong storylines and writing, but inadequate gameplay and exploration. But this, for the most part, is the opposite, where there's a lot to explore and do, but very little to get attached to. It fails to leave the grander impression of the best chapters, and flies by because most locations are pretty shallow. It's still a good time, with a memorable motif. It just lacks that important quality, that meaningful purpose and investment to really lift it up to the next level. Number 17, Color Splashes Chapter 1, Road to the Red Big Paint Star. This is a really well-crafted chapter, with a weakness very much like the last one. As a Chapter 1 though, this one's got a lot of variety. Let's break the levels down. Ruddy Road's first, an adequate easing in level and very straightforward. The tearing up the road sequence is a highlight, and does a great job setting the stage for all the unexpected moments the game's filled with. Cherry Lake's next, a very pretty location with an equally pretty background track. It's a fairly big environment that asks for careful observation, and between the nonconformist shy guy and the chosen toad who lost his clothes, the writing really shines here. The Indigo Underground follows, and is probably the low point of the chapter, but still a fine area. It's very confined, with repetitive scenery, and a fair amount of battles as you track down the Green Rescue Squad. Blue Bay Beach is next, a relaxing beach area, and another place to find a chosen toad. The Ocean Fest is also here, a simple game of hide and seek as well as a shuffle game that takes some clever thinking to win. It's another well done area with a lot of funny lines. Daffodil Peak's where the final chosen toad's found, and this place has a great layout. It starts with sprucing up the ranger toad's home for a hiking permit, and then ascending the mountain proper, only to reach a cheap cutout of the mountain sage at the top. After claiming shenanigans, it's revealed that the gatekeeper himself was the mountain sage, and not even he knew that. It's a really good payoff. After finding the 3 chosen toads, the Crimson Tower remains. This is a typical first chapter dungeon, and pretty short. It's here that you meet Morton, who's not too bright but in a cute way, and he's actually really entertaining because of that. You can tell he's doing his best, and plays the role well of first chapter boss, because despite being shown as dumb, he's still very strong. The fight's solid and very straightforward. It's a great capstone to the first chapter. Each of these levels are enjoyable to play through, with interesting challenges and unexpected events. The chosen toads give it some non-linearity since you can recruit them in any order. This is a wonderful start at setting up the adventure game-like format, and shows confidence in the player to use their own head to figure out how to move forward. Area diversity is also strong, so what exactly is holding this one back? Simply put, it doesn't have much of a focus. Finding the chosen toads is the only real connective element between these locations. You're really just trying to find the red big paint star. There's nothing more going on than that. It's nice that these levels don't linger on one thing for too long, but it lacks much of an identity because it mixes things up so often. Despite its strengths, it's not very memorable, but it is fun to play through, so I'm happy to rank it this high on the list. Number 16, Super Paper Mario's Chapter 5, Land of the Cragnods. That's right, our last Super Paper Mario chapter, and look, I know this isn't a popular one, but when looking at what it offers overall, I truly believe this is the strongest chapter in Super Paper Mario. Obviously that's a low bar, since most chapters from the game ranked in the first dozen. But even on its own, Land of the Cragnods is fairly well-rounded, but it's not without some of Super's bullshit. This is the Paper Mario series' only attempt at a prehistoric theme, and it's handled pretty well. Your mileage will vary on how likable you find the Cragnods, but their strange designs and distinct way of speaking give this place a lot of character. And, well, I love the dancing. Their presence gives this chapter more of a goal than just going through areas to find a pure heart. As bare bones as it is, there's at least a greater meaning behind her actions here. The downtown of Crag's the first area. It starts out fine enough, learning the plight of the Cragnon people, but it absolutely tanks at the block puzzles. Unsure of how to progress once you get to these blocks, you end up heading back to town to find a Cragnon who tells you the order to hit them in. This isn't egregious backtracking, but it's decidedly arbitrary. And that's just the start. It gets even worse when further in you hit another selection of blocks, forcing you to head back to town again for another solution from the Cragnon, except this time you have to say please 5 times that you literally have to spell out letter by letter. The order to hit the blocks is also 25 inputs long. He even tells you to write it down, which, yeah, you pretty much have to. This is easily compared to the General White section of the Thousand Year Door, where the game knows it's being ridiculous, but thinks being aware of that makes it okay. But it's shameless padding that comes off as trolling, and is insanely off-putting at the start of a new chapter. Thankfully, it's uphill from here. The Gap of Crag follows, and is one of the best levels in the game. The level's laid out in a sensible way, with light puzzle solving, so it's satisfying to explore, with open progression when collecting the stone tablets. Cudge is an endearing pixel who gives you the hammer ability, a mainstay for the series, showing up so late it almost feels like an afterthought. The Floro Caverns are next, home to the best track in Super Paper Mario, lending the caves an inviting ambience. It's a solid place to explore, though not as elegantly laid out as the previous area. The minecarts are pretty pointless, but they do give it some character. Flint Cragley and his crew are introduced here, and although they can be humorous, Flint's very unlikable and rambles on too much. The headquarters of the Florosapiens remain, another solid area where you find corrupted Cragnons and learn about Dementio's ulterior motives. It's a bit maze-like, but with enough structure that it's hard to get lost. It certainly feels like you're someplace you're not supposed to be. The last mandatory pixel, Dottie, also joins here. Her personality can be summarized with new age, so she stands out from the rest, but her power to shrink is significantly underutilized. The chapter boss, King Crocus, is crazy for beauty and a nice payoff to what the chapter's been building up to. The fight itself's simple, but it's more involved than most other bosses. Afterwards, you learn that the Florosapiens were kidnapping the Cragnons because they were polluting the water sources, something that's even foreshadowed in the first level. And this really lands the narrative. It's a nice twist for a satisfying conclusion to a big chapter with good ideas and themes. A lot of Super's chapters are shallow, but this one tells a story that gets deeper as you progress. It's not perfect by any measure, but when looking at it as a whole, it's the most competent chapter from Super Paper Mario. And that actually does it for this game. I'm not surprised most of Super's chapters didn't rank well, but I am surprised so many of them ranked as poorly as they did. Super Paper Mario's greatest strengths are its out-of-the-box ideas you probably wouldn't see the series try today, but the poor level design and copious amounts of padding do a lot to drag these down, and a lot of its best ideas have wasted potential. Despite its originality, Super's misguided focuses can only carry it so far. Number 15, Color Splash's Chapter 4, Road to the Purple Big Paint Star. This one stands out for Color Splash as one of only 2 chapters from that game with an overarching focus. This is a big strength of the chapter. An expedition to a mysterious pirate island harkens back to older Paper Mario titles. Much more simplified, but it gets the job done well enough. This is also one of Color Splash's shortest chapters, made up of only 4 levels that don't take long to play through. Violet Passage is first, and it's almost entirely spent navigating the Lost Sea. This is a cool idea for a challenge, and does work better than you'd think, but it can still be trying to get through if you're having a hard time lining up shots or figuring out exactly what the game wants you to do. It's still appreciated for its uniqueness, but I'll admit it's not the most fun to play through. Vortex Island's next, a fairly unremarkable place with a huge whirlpool you have to get rid of. This level introduces the the parallel world concept that's used here and in the following 2 levels, as a sort of unifying theme tying these places together. Doing things in one world to affect things in the others, a classic puzzle formula, and I particularly adore how the whirlpool's actually being caused by locals doing their laundry. Unfortunately, this area doesn't make a strong impression otherwise, and the pirate crew plays no real purpose here, so it feels kind of lacking. You could say the same about the next level as well, Lighthouse Island. A very similar place, even down to the background track, though I'm not complaining since this is my favorite track in the game. It's another quest to solve the issue at hand so the ship can continue by bouncing between the normal and parallel worlds. This is a good idea, and these places are solid to explore, they just feel very samey. The islands themselves don't have much on them, and enemies are a little too abundant, which can make them more tiring to get around. Fortune Island's the last level, which looks cool, but isn't that different from the previous 2. It's a lot of rummaging around caves, completing minor puzzles, and avoiding too many enemies. It's also not a very satisfying ending to the pirate journey. The outcome with the 2 Toad captains isn't anything special. It feels conceptually underdeveloped, and we haven't even talked about the boss yet, Wendy. Of all the Koopalings, she has the poorest showing because she's so randomly tossed into her environment. She just shows up in the last room, all of a sudden hiding in a shell, and her personality can be summed up as flirtatious. The end. It's a disappointing finale. The way she attacks in rhythm's a nice touch, but this isn't much of a fight otherwise. The instant camera's required here, which is at least blatantly made clear beforehand, but if you didn't complete the Sniff It or Whiff It bonus round during Chapter 3, you'll have to go back to Cobalt Base and play through it all over again, which is a huge pace breaker and obvious padding. Its use is at least interesting, since she captures a fake version of Mario to drown in coins. I'm happy to see her iconic rings show up to some extent. But I guess that does it for this one. I complained quite a bit, but as you can see by the ranking, there's a lot of charm to this chapter. There's a motivation to the journey, so it feels a bit more meaningful. But I won't deny that these are the most similar areas in the game, and end up feeling very homogenized. You really feel the linearity of this chapter too, and while that does lend it a sense of momentum, it can also feel very repetitive. With all that said, these are well-designed areas. Despite how much more it could be fleshed out, this chapter's simple premise of a pirate adventure in a game that's usually bouncing around solidifies it as one of the most memorable parts of Color Splash, and it's understandably a fan favorite. Number 14, The Thousand Year Doors Chapter 5, The Key to Pirates. The tried and true pirate adventure of the series. This is a simple one with a traditional structure. Sail to a cursed island, get stranded, find the legendary treasure of the Pirate King, and make friends with him to sail home. That covers most of it. There are a few other little plot threads like Lord Crump's insurgence and Admiral Bobbery's near-death experience, but this is one of the more basic plot lines in The Thousand Year Door. It's still a good arc, and nice for a break from the more emotional storylines of other chapters. Flavio's logs are a great framework, and the scene where your ship's sunk by ghosts in a panic is an exciting start. But things quickly lose momentum once you're on the island, which brings me to why this chapter isn't ranked any higher. When you break down how much time is spent reading, there's not a lot of substance here. Considering how basic this plot is, there's way too much talking setting everything up. Only once you enter Pirate's Grotto do you have a longer section of gameplay, but at the end it's back to a lot of talking. If you removed all the dialogue from this chapter, you're not left with much, and while that would be the same for a lot of other chapters from this game, more often than not they at least have intriguing storylines to keep you engaged. This one's plot's so simple, it's noticeable how much time you spend with it, when ideally a setting like this would be a great opportunity to stretch your legs. Sadly, Keel Hall Key's far too limited for that. It's nothing like the sprawling jade jungle in the original Paper Mario. It feels remarkably underdesigned. This jungle amounts to walking back and forth through a handful of hallways with very little substance, and constantly respawning enemies. The grotto's better as one of the more involved dungeons in this game. Granted, it's not the most interesting place, but at least it lets you play it. As an island expedition, this chapter gets the job done, but the environmental design design is so disappointing. It's linear, short, and constantly makes you backtrack. I guess I'm trashing on this one pretty hard considering how high I've ranked it, but the characters make this scenario fun. Flavio's your typical full of himself coward and plays the role perfectly. Paw Patch and the Toad searching for his lost brother help create a group dynamic that draws you more into the scenario. Admiral Bobry's a highlight and one of the most fleshed out partners in the series. His distinct appearance and vivid personality are practically iconic, and he has one of the most somber backstories a partner's ever been given. He's pretty one-note in battle, but blasting every enemy to pieces is a good one-note. The chapter boss, Cortez, is the best element I've yet to mention. This is a cool character. His design's well done, his boss theme's great. And you even make friends with him by the end, leading to a rewarding scene where he leads a counterattack against the X-Nauts, the only satisfying thing about their inclusion. I'm inclined to say his fight's memorable since it has 3 phases, but area attacks make it a joke. Alongside Rockhawk and Dupless, he's one of the most charismatic bosses from the Thousand-Year Door. That about does it for this chapter. Its weaknesses are very apparent. The level design could use work, and while the writing's entertaining, trimming it down would dramatically improve the pace. But even with its flaws, it's still a classic, with a fun setup, solid dungeon, and memorable characters. Number 13, Paper Mario's Chapter 2, The Mystery of Dry, Dry Ruins. A fair amount of players don't care for this chapter. Desert levels are some of the most loathed in the world of gaming. More often than not, I end up enjoying them, but this one's nothing special. It's certainly not going to win over anyone who isn't already a fan. Dry, Dry Desert's a very deserty desert. It's an enormous area, but bizarrely enough, very little of it actually requires exploration. In fact, it's like 90% empty space. There are a few secrets to find, but most of them aren't worth the trouble. It almost feels intentionally designed to be boring. Maybe to really sell that feeling of traversing a desert? This, combined with the somewhat cryptic progression once you reach Dry Dry Outpost, can make this section a drag. Thankfully, once you've gotten to the ruins, things get better. This dungeon nails the atmosphere. It's a step up from the Koopa Brothers Fortress, with an ideal length, but the boss is a letdown. Tutton Koopa is very unimpressive. I'll shout out his pretty funky theme, but it also has a really short loop. He's easier than the Koopa Brothers, and fails to make much of an impression by the time he goes down, making for a weak climax. Oh, we've gotta go back though. I've yet to mention Mount Rugged, a brief mountain area starting the chapter off. Considering the train could have dropped you right at the desert, I appreciate that they bothered to include this place at all, since it's fun to work your way around. The chapter partner Parakarry's picked up here, a postman who dropped letters all over the place that you can find and deliver. He's alright, but kind of boring, and his motivation to join's pretty weak. He feels like a tool for Mario to use more than most partners. I'm noticing a pattern. None of the characters in this chapter are really worth praising. The partner's unexciting, the boss is lackluster, Moustafa barely has a presence, hell, the optional boss Buzzer makes a stronger impression. I do appreciate that it lays the groundwork for the archaeologist Colorado, who plays a bigger role later on. But from everything I've said, this chapter seems like quite the mixed bag, and I guess it is when you really break it down, but despite its shortcomings, it's a strong Paper Mario chapter when it comes to the scenario. Expeditions are some of the best motifs in this series. Heading into a desert, getting help from mysterious locals, and plundering of forgotten tombs, a classic adventure premise. Many of its elements could be more fleshed out, but this chapter deserves a good ranking for embodying the authentic desert adventure. Number 12, Color Splashes Chapter 5, Road to the Orange Big Paint Star. And here's our other Color Splash chapter with an overarching focus, a journey surrounding the Sunset Express and its passengers. While I like the premise of the pirate adventure more, this chapter is just more well-rounded. Mustard Cafe starts it off, and it's the only level that has nothing to do with the train. But as a standalone venture, this place is awesome. After falling into a massive sinkhole, you have to help the Toad Chef get back to the surface. While this place has a lot of enemies, they're easy to avoid, and figuring out how to get through these areas is interesting. What really sets this one over the top, though, is the surprise kidnapping and lockup by Sniffits, living in an undersand hideout. Breaking out and methodically working your way around its floors to rescue the chef and reach the surface is an extra mile the level didn't need to go that really makes it worthwhile. Afterwards, the train quest begins, very subtly, so it's off to the repair factory. The Toad Train Works is next, a novel environment and a very open level since you can set the train parts in any order. It's a realistic setting with a touch of wackiness. It's really fun to solve the problems here, and it has a surprising amount of character, which is also true for the next stop, Tangerino Grill. Another setting I adore for its originality. I don't think I've ever seen a steakhouse-like restaurant in a Nintendo game, and that alone's really cool. It's not much of a level to explore though. This is a gimmick-focused area, and those can either be fulfilling or insanely aggravating. Guess which one this is? You have to cook two different meals here, a pizza and a steak. The pizza isn't too bad, only asking for some action commands and simple mini-games. The 10-second timer can be a little tight, but it's simple enough. The steak's the real ordeal, especially on a first playthrough. Cooking it correctly requires a specific sequence of tenderizing and using things in the proper order, and there's pretty much no lenience for messing up, which is awfully easy to do and can be quite costly. This whole part can feel very cryptic, but if you talk to everyone, it's easy enough to know what it wants from you. But in being so sensitive, it's understandably controversial. This can be a miserable sequence. The last area is the Sunset Express itself, hijacked by the chapter boss Larry and run amok with chaos. The train's unfortunately a bit basic, but it's a nice set piece to end on. The car filled with enemies contemplating their lives as Bowser's minions is a well-known highlight. But there's not much that stands out about this place otherwise, and the few puzzles it does have are by the numbers. Larry at least makes a strong showing, with a profound smugness, even more so than the other Koopalings. He has the most presence out of all of them, since he was also the VIP who demanded the perfect steak. His lazy characterization's well expressed, relying on his underlings to get ahead, which he even does in battle. This fight has a nice sense of progression to it, fending off his minions so the Toad engineer can get to the cabin and chase off a Shy Guy who keeps healing him. It can be easy to use the cork prematurely, but it's a solid fight. After he's beaten, the train reaches its destination and is in such good shape it's no longer planned for retirement. This is a satisfying ending that feels more complete than Chapter 4's. It's hard not to compare these two chapters, since they're both centered around a Toad journey with a unique form of conveyance. They both feel short, with 4 straightforward levels, one of which is centered around a gimmicky playstyle. But this chapter is the stronger of the two, with a more creative motif. While it would appreciate a bit more exploration, its consistency guarantees it's one of Color Splash's most memorable adventures. Number 11, Paper Mario's Chapter 6, Dark Days in Flower Fields. Look, ranking this at number 11 shows that I'm not trolling and that I truly believe this. I look forward to this chapter every time I replay this game. Flower Fields is often considered the worst chapter in the original Paper Mario. And when looking at its design, it's easy to see why people feel this way. It's similar to Shy Guy's Toy Box in that it doesn't have much of a storyline, and is mostly made up of backtracking through areas to give things to different characters. This one can also feel more like busy busy work, and knowing where to go next can be confusing. But in spite of all this, I really enjoy it. There's this dreamlike, fairy tale quality to this setting that just captivates me. The talking flowers and soft visuals just make it such an enchanting place. Even the way you enter this land through a mystical door born of blossoming flowers is just so whimsical. It's not often you see a flower motif as one of the last areas really in any game, and I love that about it. It's refreshing to see a theme like this not always relegated to the early hours. This place isn't difficult or anything, but it would be nice to see unexpected thematic progression more often, especially in the Mario series. It even ends in a fluffy cloudland that's unfortunately too small. The flower characters are a lot of fun, each with their own distinct personalities and quirks, and although you don't spend too long with any one of them, they really stand out. Their interpersonal drama gives them depth, while their carefully chosen designs are well suited to their identities. The final partner of this game, Lackluster, joins here, a Lakitu who tries to act tough to impress his girlfriend. He's one of the more inspired partners in the original game, since he starts as an adversary. There isn't much reason for him to join though. It kind of seems like he's just trying to find himself, but a Lakitu's a great concept for a partner. Although he isn't the most useful, his skills make good use of his species. The final character's the boss, Huff and Puff. He's similar to Tutton Koopa and Lava Piranha in that he doesn't make an appearance until it's time to battle, but unlike them, he's well built up. Most of the bosses in this game just kind of exist to protect their star spirit. A few of them do cause trouble, but Huff and Puff's causing severe harm by taking away something essential for the locals of this land to survive. He's directly attempting mass extinction, making him incredibly threatening, and this is well expressed in his unapologetically brutal battle. Brutal for this game, at least. I'd say this is the most challenging mandatory fight in the first Paper Mario. Huff and Puff demands strategy. He's a considerable difficulty spike and can easily catch you off guard your first time through. Even though he doesn't show up until the end, he nails the criteria for a great chapter boss. I love his big, puffy design, and go figure, he has one of the best battle tracks in the game. So yeah, playing through this one can feel tedious, and it also doesn't have much of a narrative, so it's not hard to see how it falls short. But I have a great time playing through it. The sheer charm of such warm environments is just so inviting. And honestly, the backtracking's not that bad. Whether you love this chapter or can't stand it, either way, it's one of the most memorable parts of the original game. And with that covered, we've officially made it to the top 10. I'm confident the next 10 chapters are the best the series has ever offered. Sticker Star and Super didn't make it this far, but 4 more games are still in the lineup. The top 10 are on a whole other level compared to everything we've talked about so far. These are the real Paper Mario All-Stars. Number 10, The Origami King's Chapter 2, The Blue Streamer. I did think this chapter would rank even higher. That's not to say this is at all a bad ranking. We're in the top 10 of nearly 50 entries, and this is a big chapter with a lot to offer. You can easily split this chapter in 2, Autumn Mountain and Shogun Studios. Autumn Mountain's expectedly beautiful, as a rarely themed setting with gorgeous visuals. The exploration here is pretty rudimentary, but it's still fun. Chestnut Valley's a side attraction where you have to keep tracking down the new partner Bob-omb, a magnet for misfortune. An indistinct Bob-omb without a fuse who's lost his memory. This guy's likable, but he doesn't contribute much throughout the chapter, and has kind of a muddled personality. He's kind of a naive, scaredy cat who also tries to play it cool, and ends up feeling like an excuse for distractions. Although Olivia calls him Bobby, he doesn't even have a distinct name. Suffice it to say, his inclusion's a bit aimless, nameless, but it's important that he's here so there's an attachment by Chapter 3, where he really pays off. Next up is the Water Elemental Shrine, which is just an okay dungeon. It's too short and the puzzles are too easy. The battle against the Water Elementals also nothing special, and can feel a bit drawn out. What really lifts these locations up is just how aesthetically beautiful and consistently creative they are, and the music tracks really help the vibes. In fact, the Autumn Mountain battle theme's one of the best tracks in the series, with an amazing energy and beat. The Eddy River's up next, a sort of mini-game of piloting a boat downriver while avoiding obstacles. It actually works quite well, and doesn't overstay its welcome, though I can certainly see it being frustrating. Following is the second major setting of the chapter, Shogun Studios. A huge reason this chapter ranks so highly. A theme park based on ancient Japan's really original, and it has an intricate layout with various attractions. It's a really high-effort location that executes the adventure game format perfectly. It's one of the most effective open areas since the series moved towards this formula. The Shuriken Dojo minigame's surprisingly fun, and the House of Tricky Ninjas is an adorable novelty. The Big Show Theater remains, a 4-story theater where the seats double as an elevator to carry you up through shows. This is a nice capstone to the entertainment theme, and including Mario as a part of each performance leads to a lot of funny moments, and even Birdo plays a part here. It's nice to see an underutilized Mario character get a bit of screen time. This is a very imaginative lead up to the Chapter 2 boss, Rubber Band, my least favorite member in the Legion of Stationary. A self-absorbed performer type doesn't do much for me. Its design's interesting at least, playing with what rubber bands can do. The battle gimmick removes vertical arrows from the board, so you have to make use of rubber bands to get where you want to go, which can make it difficult to create rewarding lineups. It's not the most fun, and while the battle theme's solid, it loses out to the other Legion of Stationary tracks. That covers this robust chapter. Despite the creative locations and ideas, it lacks a strong narrative focus. And while that's par for the course in the Origami King, it stands out here for how long the chapter is. There's just not much depth to what's going on, and some areas can feel a bit shallow. This is still an ambitious chapter, deserving of a top 10 ranking, but it'd be nice if it was more intellectually or emotionally stimulating. Cutting down Olivia's interruptions would have also really helped. Still, these are standout areas in the Origami King, where the game really starts to stretch its creative legs, enough to ensure a lasting impression. Number 9, Color Splash's Chapter 3, Road to the Blue Big Paint Star. The last Color Splash chapter to be ranked, and another one without much of an overarching focus. You do have the quest to find the teapot for the Ghost Tea Party, but this really only spans 2 levels, and it's never brought up again. Like many other chapters, this series of levels doesn't make the grander impression of a traditional Paper Mario chapter, but it ranks as highly as it does thanks to 2 incredibly well-done areas: the Dark Blue Inn and Fort Cobalt, some of the best set pieces in the game. If you've played this game before, you'll likely remember the Dark Blue Inn. Like I said about the Enig Mansion, haunted houses are effortlessly appealing. To start, it has a superb sense of atmosphere as a spooky inn with strange activity going on, helping the Toad ghosts with their various complaints so they can get to their tea parties. A great setup. But there's one thing keeping this level down. There's actually usually a set amount of time to help the Toads before, well, everything resets, and then you have to start all over. This can easily lead to aggravation if you're having a hard time figuring out how to help one of them out. It's not at all necessary to have this invisible timer, but it's not enough to keep this level from being one of the best in the game. This is a really awesome setting, with fun puzzles and a nice sense of humor. The following area, Plum Park's, relevant as the place you find the missing teapot, and I like this area quite a bit. A poisonous garden's a unique idea, and this one has a great layout. Birdo even has a singing cameo here, and afterwards there's a surprise boss fight against PT Piranha. It's delightfully random for him to show up, and actually have some personality with a few lines of dialogue. The level even undergoes a visual overhaul after he's defeated. Plum Park's really well rounded, and a great gameplay focused area. Sacred Forest is the next full level, but not before a short visit to Violet Passage to fend off a Shy Guy invasion in a fun sequence. Sacred Forest, however, is a good idea that's underdeveloped, not unlike Mondo Woods. Being giant in a tiny world's an appealing motif. It's the only reason the level stands out at all, but there's just not much to it. You hunt down mini paint star pieces while fighting small versions of enemies. Being huge isn't really used in an interesting way. It's a decidedly basic segment, but at least it has a few funny jokes. Cobalt Base is next, and it isn't much of a level. This is a sniff it or whiff it game show that's underwater themed for some reason, and a bit of a controversial one. This is a much better challenge than Sticker Stars, having you use cards to answer questions with a good amount of variety. However, there's no denying how irritating it can be to mess up a question and have to redo the whole quiz over again for an essential thing needed in Chapter 4. It's probably a bit much to ask for a perfect run of every question, 10 in total, to get something you absolutely need, but at the same time, the questions only ask for basic observation skills. It can be easy to mess up, but it isn't that hard to complete either. That said, while this is a novel diversion, it's not exactly a level I look forward to replaying. Finally, we come to the other standout area of Chapter 3, Fort Cobalt, an entirely original setting for the Paper Mario series. A military base like you'd find in Metal Gear Solid, and it isn't afraid to be overt about the similarities. This place is a ton of fun to explore, with a lot of charisma and detail, including a training room and a cafe where the owner's doubling as an informant. They did a fantastic job with the motif. The chapter boss is Ludwig, who has a strong showing thanks to his confidence and super Ludship. This fight asks for some specific cards to deal damage, but all of his weaknesses are conveyed thoroughly ahead of time. Countering with tail attacks is really satisfying, and using balloons to lift the Lud sub out of the water is easy to figure out. It's a well-designed fight for Color Splash, with a pretty snazzy track. That does it for Chapter 3. Just like Chapter 1, its lack of an overarching thread to tie it all together muddles its identity, and progression can feel very random. But outside of some levels that might take a few tries to complete, it doesn't have many weaknesses. Average is about as bad as it gets. This chapter has some of the most creative, immersive, and straight up funny areas in the game. And this is the last entry from Paper Mario Color Splash. It did quite well in the rankings. This game has a lot of great levels and sequences, so I'm happy to see it crack the top 10. The most consistent thing holding its chapters back is a lack of fleshed out storylines, but the bite-sized ones it does present are very inspired and a lot of fun. I'm happy to see more appreciation for this title as new people give it a chance. It's a delightful game with a lot of charm and imagination. Number 8, The Thousand Year Doors Chapter 4 for Pigs the Bell Tolls. You might be surprised to see this one getting such a high ranking. This is the most infamous backtracking chapter in The Thousand Year Door, a trait that certainly holds it back. An uneven chapter like this can be tough to evaluate, but scenario design is one of the most important aspects of a top-tier Paper Mario chapter, and that's the primary reason I'm giving it this much credit. Just look at how captivating this setting is. There's a great use of color and shadows here, for a thick layer of dark and creepy. It's almost Halloween-like, with wonderfully spooky NPCs and music to enhance the vibe even further. After arriving here, you quickly learn about the curse where every time the steeple bell rings, someone turns into a pig. That's a cool setup to start, and just the tip of the iceberg. After traveling to Creepy Steeple, a very striking location, you confront and defeat the one responsible, a creature that can transform into other people. After defeating him, you claim the crystal star, and the typical chapter ending plays out, but something's off. It's all over a bit too easily. Confusion sets in as, after the boss fight, you don't cut away to Peach, and the chapter's still going. You're left on this screen until you realize you're now controlling the Mario shadow the boss turned into. That's when it hits you. After making your way back to Twilight Town, you're confronted by the doppelganger Mario. The boss, Dupless, stole your body and name, preventing you from returning to Rogueport and destroying your identity by acting like kind of a jackass. This is an A+ plot twist. Dupless himself is notably popular. He's characterized well with a lot of snappy dialogue. The battles against him are easy but solid. You even get to beat up your partners, and he has a pretty good battle track. The rest of the chapter plays out straightforwardly enough, but this premise is so strong, it's one of the most memorable parts of the entire series. And we haven't even gotten to Vivian, a major fan favorite partner thanks to her gothic design and sympathetic backstory. Her story's presented very naturally, and her bond with Mario feels authentic. She also rocks in combat, with incredibly strong attacks and very flexible range. Her on-field application's also one of the most fun to use for puzzles. There's honestly a strong argument for Vivian being the best partner in the series. So, beyond all of the praise, how's the backtracking? Here's how the chapter flows. You start in Twilight Town, go halfway through Twilight Trail, go back to Twilight Town, go all the way through Twilight Trail to Creepy Steeple. Now go all the way back to Twilight Town, then go all the way back to Creepy Steeple. Again, go all the way back to Twilight Town, and finally, go all the way back to Creepy Steeple. And this is the best case scenario. Woof. And did I mention all of the enemies respawn between every trip? The chapter doesn't really try to mask the padding, and it doesn't help that Twilight Trail itself's pretty lame, with a lot of tight pathways, so it's hard to avoid enemies. And it asks for paper abilities several times, so it's slow to move through. Most of the time, you don't even spend long at each place once you're there. Creepy Steeple could also be bigger. Visually it's cool, but the layout feels aimless, and it's over so fast, it comes off as underdeveloped. The level design throughout this chapter lets down the motif propping it up. It has so much potential conceptually, but ends up lacking in execution. As you can see, the chapter concept's one hell of a success to get it ranked this highly, despite its unavoidable flaws. So imagine how much higher this could rank if areas had more substance and the backtracking wasn't so rampant. Even though it relies so much on its aesthetic and ideas, this is an undeniably iconic Paper Mario chapter, and one of the most original the series has seen. Number 7, Paper Mario's Chapter 5, Hot, Hot Times on Lava Lava Island. Of the several island adventures throughout the series, the first one's still the best, and a clear example of a prime Paper Mario chapter with a traditional premise. Yoshis are well suited to the Paper Mario style, and their society's nicely presented here. It's a shame they're not used more in other titles, but honestly, it's nice to see them play a more supplementary role for a change. The mission to find the Yoshi kids is a creative way to explore the jungle, a pretty big jungle at that, with some interesting things to mess around with. Raphael the Raven's an interesting inclusion. As brief as his part is, he manages to leave an impression. Colorado's the real standout character of the chapter though, and an essential component to the expedition motif. This chapter wouldn't work nearly as well without him here. He's careless, single-minded, and selfish, but even considering that, there's still an endearing quality to him, because because he's just so passionate about his work. He even tries to attack the chapter boss to total ineffectiveness, but I give him credit for that. I've always loved piranha plants, so I have a soft spot for the lava piranha. A titanic, flaming behemoth with his tongue hanging out's my kind of design. Despite how easily cheesed this fight can be with Sushi, it's a decent difficulty spike at this point in the game. He's the first boss to actually feel like he's going all out, even pulling a fake-out defeat before round 2. The lava piranha sadly doesn't have a lot of character. He's easily compared to Tut and Koopa, only appearing at the end of the chapter with a few fighting words before battle. With that considered, he at least shows up in combat and spectacle. Sushi, the Cheep Cheeps, also introduced here, and she's one of the more inspired partner choices. She babysits the Yoshi children and joins Mario after learning of his mission to save Peach. She also has useful moves in battle. What really lifts this chapter up is its level design. There's a depth to these areas you don't see too often in the earlier titles. Mount Lava Lava's pretty well crafted, with a nicely presented volcanic atmosphere. It's not a complicated layout, but it's a well put together one. The escape sequence is the icing on the cake, and a perfect way to end a strong chapter. I don't have much else to say about this one. All of its components are well done. Certain things could be more fleshed out, but it really doesn't feel lacking in any way. It's a strong chapter from start to finish, with a lot of memorable moments. If anything's holding this one back, it's the somewhat tame themes. But this chapter represents so much of what's appealing about this series, and proves you don't need surprises or deep emotions to be exemplary. Number 6, The Thousand Year Doors Chapter 3 of Glitz and Glory. Unique and iconic, we all know this one. When it comes to scenario design, man is this one a heavy hitter. This chapter sees Mario battling his way up the ranks of a fighting arena to claim the Crystal Star on the championship belt, with shady happenings behind the scenes every step of the way. Fighters disappearing, mysterious emails, poisoned cake? How could you do that to cake? Paper Mario narratives are always at their best when mysteries are involved, and this chapter is one of the biggest reasons why. Props to having an actually satisfying resolution, too, with Grubba ousted as the evil mastermind, sapping fighters of their power to keep himself fit and healthy. Jolene also plays a crucial role to keep you guessing. Rockhawk's another great inclusion, throwing more motivations and herrings into the mix. Just look at him, he's one of the most memorable characters in the entire franchise. Cliche for sure, but still a lot of fun. With such a well-rounded cast, it all wraps up very nicely. The partner this time's an interesting one. A baby Yoshi who you even name yourself. He's okay, kind of a feisty brat, which is fine, but there's not much to him beyond that. Then again, how could there be when he was just born? There's still a lot you could do with him experiencing things for the first time, but they rarely acknowledge that, so he ends up feeling narratively underutilized. He's pretty good in battle, but I don't really use him much. Considering how much running around's in this game though, he certainly sees a lot of on-field use, though I'm not a fan of the sound effect he comes with. And I of course have to mention, he can even be different colors. Dang, way to go out of your way with this really cool detail for a partner. Since this chapter's themed around a fighting arena, of course it has a lot of battling, so I couldn't be more grateful that there's a huge variety of enemies. This easily could have been a boring grind of the same foes rearranged over and over, so good on them for ensuring it stays fresh. So, why isn't this chapter higher when I'm singing its praises, and haven't pointed to a thing wrong with it? It has a great narrative, great battles, and great oh, yes. That's exactly why. Exploration's very important to me in this series, and breaking this chapter down, it's about 65% dialogue, 30% battling, and 5% exploration. Exploration's almost entirely sacrificed for the sake of the set piece. Don't get me wrong, it's nice for a chapter to try something different once in a while, and this one nails exactly what it's going for, but it can be very repetitive. There's a lot of dialogue in this chapter, so it inevitably takes takes a long time to get through. The first half when you're in the minor leagues can be especially off-putting on your first playthrough. Like, what the hell? Just grinding battles to get the Crystal Star? Did you give up? Where's the adventure? It's only once you reach the major league that the story opens up and becomes a lot more absorbing. This is a splendid chapter, but I understand why not everyone cares for it. The balance between talking scenes and controlling Mario's just so one-sided. The chapter's memorable moments can help distract from its weaknesses. Discovering the bodies of missing fighters, getting locked in the unused locker room so you'll miss the championship. Bowser even shows up suddenly at one point, jumping into the arena for an on-the-spot battle. The Macho Grubba fight's just okay. Grubba makes for a great antagonist, but the battle itself's way too easy, and fails to leave much of an impression. Rockhawk's battle's also simple, but it leaves a stronger impression thanks to him playing dirty, as well as a gnarly battle track. There's a lot to say about this one. This chapter does a great job helping the world feel more alive. It's a standout chapter of the 1,000-Year Door, showcasing one of the most creative stories the series has ever told. But in committing so hard to that premise, other qualities are diminished. It's inevitable that a chapter like this won't win over everyone, but I've seen plenty of fans who love it so much, they'd be happy to rank it in the #1 spot. Number 5, The 1,000-Year Doors Chapter 6, 3 Days of Excess. Beating out Glitzville by a hair, we arrive at the last 1,000-Year Door entry, and another one of the most iconic chapters in the series. Just like Glitzville, this chapter is largely made up of dialogue with little focus on exploration, and even further than that, little focus on battling. This is a reading chapter for sure, but Riverside Station's a smart inclusion to help make up a little for what it otherwise lacks. I'm getting ahead of myself though. Let's start with the premise. Being on a train for 3 days while various mysteries pop up is certainly novel. It's the kind of set piece you want to jump in and start playing. Missing valuables, stowaways, a threat of a sticky death. I just said it and I'll say it again. Paper Mario chapters are often at their best when engrossed in mystery, and this is another wonderful example of that. The train itself's a charming setting, and a far more relatable one than the usual overused level themes. Nighttime on a train couldn't be cozier. These NPCs are all well characterized and memorable. You get to know each one throughout the trip, which helps the experience feel more immersive and personal. Of course, this chapter has a lot of running around, but that's kind of expected with mystery-centric chapters. It sort of comes with the territory. And it helps that the dialogue has a good sense of humor. Riverside Station comes into play around halfway, giving you some much-needed time to stretch your legs in a more gameplay-focused environment. And it even has some nice visuals. Some of this game's other chapters would have benefited from having their own concentrated areas of exploration like this one, as a break from all the back and forth and reading. So I give this one credit for including this place. The chapter boss, Smorg, doesn't really have an identity, but is a pretty cool design. The quiet morning, where you slowly realize everyone's been abducted, is a great lead-up to the battle on top of the train. This boss fight's alright. Easily taken care of, as most of this game's bosses are when you know what you're doing, but your first time through, it's likely a decent challenge. It's not the most memorable, considering Smorg basically has no character, but it's adequate for a chapter boss, leaving the focus on the NPCs you've spent so much time with. Poshley Heights is the next location, and another unique environment. It's always nice to see a theme that hasn't been beaten to death throughout the series, in this case a ritzy town of mansions. Unfortunately, there's very little here, so while I like the theme, they don't do much with it. The Sanctum itself isn't much, but walking into a painting to find the real crystal star's a clever idea. And that about does it for this one. If you're going to have a chapter that's focused on quirky dialogue and mysteries, this is a prime example of doing it well. The unique atmosphere and setup is just so interesting for a Mario game. Because it's so out of the ordinary, the scenario hits in a special way, undoubtedly making this one of the most authentic chapters in the series. And that does it for Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. Its chapters are a lot like Super's, in that their greatest strength are their out-of-the-box ideas. At the same time, though, many of them suffer from a critical weakness, usually level design or padding. But considering that, this game ranked a whole lot better. Several chapters from this title are so renowned that a lot of fans consider them the best in the series. The Thousand Year Door made it to the top 5, which leaves us with only 2 Paper Mario titles left, the oldest and newest, go figure. So let's keep going, and see which one makes it out on top. Number 4, Paper Mario's Chapter 3, The Invincible Tubba Blubba. Another exceptional chapter from the original Paper Mario. It's easy to see why this one's so beloved. Interesting storytelling, atmospheric environments, one of the most charismatic partners in the game, and the most fleshed out antagonist in the original Paper Mario after Bowser. This is chronologically the first real all-star Paper Mario chapter. Well, okay, I will say the starting area Forever Forest, while a fun idea, isn't much fun to actually play through. Being a Lost Woods type of place can lead to repetition and trial and error, but at least this one's about observing the environment as opposed to just guessing. Once you hit Boo's mansion, it's all good from there. Exploring the mansion doesn't take long, but there's a really nice ambience to the setting that actually makes it feel kind of creepy. I particularly love the lead-in shot on the exterior. Lady Bo's undoubtedly one of the best partners in the first game. While still a simple character, her personality's well expressed. The partners before this chapter feel pretty samey, and they're easily taken at face value. But Bo holds the escaped Star Spirit hostage herself to encourage Mario to help them. She's not a bad Boo, she just knows she can't take Tubba Blubba on her own. And even then, she doesn't just send Mario on the task, she insists on helping out herself. This isn't that deep, but there's clearly a more concrete identity behind her than the other companions. The boss, Tubba Blubba, stands out from the other bosses in a similar way. The mystery of how he's invincible and what his secret weakness is quickly catches your attention. The final reveal that his heart's been separated from his body and hidden inside a locked windmill's a satisfying payoff. The fight against Tubba's heart's good in theory, but ends up being a breeze since using Bo's out-of-sight ability means its only dangerous attacks never going to hit. After the heart and body are reunited, you see Tubba Blubba's naturally weak power firsthand, by kicking his ass in under a minute. After he's beaten, you learn a bit about why he attacked the Boos in the first place. Most other bosses show loyalty to Bowser without any real backstory, so it's refreshing to see one with his own motivations and history, as minimal as it is. Tubba Blubba's castle's a fine dungeon, a bit lacking in personality, but that actually fits his carelessness. The game does a great job ensuring Tubba Blubba feels intimidating. He's truly invincible before uncovering the secret, forcing you to run from him. The scene where he eats a Boo in a single gulp clearly shows why he's a threat, and the final chase sequence, while brief, is thrilling. As far as everything else goes, the Boos are cute, and Gusty Gulch has a nice aesthetic and soundtrack. This is a very well-paced chapter. It's not only one of the most memorable in the original title, but one of the most iconic in the series. It deserves recognition for how well done it is. Amusingly enough, this chapter hardly has any weaknesses, making it about as strong as its namesake. Number 3, The Origami King's Chapter 3, The Yellow Streamer. Man, is this a strong chapter. Deserts are close to overused in this series, but this one's not only unique, it's the best. Since this chapter covers a few different areas, it's almost unfairly spectacular in a ranking like this. And here's the thing, I barely have any criticisms for this one. It's well-paced, has a great adventure feel to it with a lot of creativity, and it's very open thanks to its enormous size. This is one of the single longest chapters in the series, starting off in an unexpected and brilliant sequence aboard the Princess Peach cruise ship. Another relatable setting, and you kind of piece together what happened here as you look around. It's not a long segment, but because it comes out of nowhere, it helps the world feel more organic. Its pleasantly unnerving atmosphere makes it a lot of fun to explore, and it even caps off with a satisfying boss fight against against Paper Macho Gooper Blooper. Spending some quality time with Bob-omb's a smart choice before his sacrifice to save Olivia. While his character's a bit aimless throughout Chapter 2, it's here where his inclusion becomes 100% worth it. This is an effective emotional moment because he's been with the group for some time by this point, and there's meaning in his sacrifice. His ghost showing up's pretty unnecessary, but I get it. They had to tone the feeling of loss down for the younger audience. But otherwise, Olivia's reaction and the music choice sell this moment. It's handled tastefully and lingered on just long enough to make a believable impact. Just like Bob-omb did. I know you hate that I'm not calling him Bobby. Also, Mario runs for him. I love that. And now we actually come to the primary setting of Chapter 3, the scorching sandpaper desert. A nighttime motif's an inspired change from the nearly identical deserts the series has seen before now. And like I said, this is a big one. Thankfully, the creatively silly boot car's a wonderful solution to getting around quickly, so the size isn't an issue. Sniff City freaking rocks, a sort of tourist destination taken over and run by Sniffits, who are charmingly inept. Like, what an original place to explore. Progression through this chapter is pretty open. It lets you figure most things out yourself, where to go, who to talk to, and how to complete puzzles. It's nice that the hand-holding's cooled off a bit by this point. The chapter also introduces its own partner, Professor Toad. As an archaeologist, he's surprisingly entertaining, but also not the most memorable. Still a worthwhile addition to sell the motif with a few funny moments, but not much really stands out about him. The Fire Elemental Cave's a striking one, but short and very linear, since it's almost entirely focused on dodging fire. It's cool to have a dungeon that's action-focused, but it's over before you know it. The Fire Elemental itself's wicked cool, but I wish the fight was as impressive. I want to like this battle because it has an interesting concept, asking you to time the final attack when the boss is weak enough to be taken down. But it's practically designed for you to mess it up the first time because you have no way of knowing about the gimmick until you suffer the consequences, which leads to the boss restoring its entire health bar. So you basically have to start the fight over. It's an appropriately infamous boss fight because of this. The Temple of Shrooms is a better dungeon-like environment. It's the best desert temple of the many the series has tried, since it has a sensible layout as well as a delightful element of creepiness, thanks to toads who have had their faces hole punched out. The disco song Thrills at Night, that's used to coax the boss out, is an absolute slammer, starring in a superb dance sequence I opened this video with. And immediately afterwards, you're introduced to Hole Punch, a really entertaining member of the Legion of Stationery with a really nice battle theme. This is a harsh-as-hell music critic with old-fashioned taste that loves to dance. But what I really like about its integration is how its power's the excuse for the permanent nighttime setting. Because it hole-punched the sun. This battle involves knocking the punched-out scraps from its lid to restore things on the board, as well as Mario's own empty face. It's all really well done for a satisfying finale to a robust chapter. This one just has so much fun with its themes, locations, and ideas. I didn't even mention the glorious Sniff It Pool song, but I'll play it for you later. Aside from the lackluster Fire Elemental stuff, if there's any low point to be found, I guess it would be the Sniff It minigame, which can lead to a cheap game over if the solution's not clicking. It can also be easy to get lost on what to do next, but it's nice to have the freedom to figure things out yourself for a change. Between the excellent set pieces, captivating moments, and enjoyable exploration, this is an all-star Paper Mario chapter. Number 2, The Origami King's Chapter 5, The Green Streamer. It was a tough choice between this and Chapter 3 for the top Origami King spot. But this one just wins out for how unique it is, as well as fleshing out pre-existing Mario characters. The Shangri's Spa, a paradise of hot springs in the clouds run by angel-like toads. It feels pretty special to arrive here, and it gets even better when you learn that Bowser's castle crashed into the campus this, and his minions have to work off the debt. That's just brilliant, and it's not even the funniest thing here. I now present the most comically insulting treatment I've ever seen for a major Mario character. Freaking visceral. Bowser Jr. cut to pieces the moment he appears and dropped in mud. A blissful cherry on top of this fluffy cake. I actually don't mind Bowser Jr. as a character. I don't think he's very popular in the fan base, and since he's only ever shown as an obnoxious, hot-headed brat, it's easy to see why. This game does a great job utilizing that character. His accident's the focal point of the chapter, creating the quest to visit every hot spring and restore his body with the power of cleansing treatments. Don't forget to get your card stamps for a free prize. Like, what a fun framework. And I haven't even gotten to Kamek yet, a standout figure of this game. He's worlds more entertaining than he's ever been. So much so that he's one of my favorite partners in this series now. His character's just so humorous. He's competent but avoids taking risks, swearing by logic to make decisions. He plays the underappreciated second-in-command perfectly. I'm shocked just how likable they managed to make him after he was anything but in Sticker Star and Color Splash. It's completely reformed my view of the character. These locations have simple layouts, but they're fun to explore because they're constantly throwing in unexpected events. The Shy Guys finished last game shows a huge improvement over the Sniff It or Whiff It challenges of the past. They put a good amount of effort and variety into this. But if you hate the ring mechanic, you're likely to hate this challenge, especially if you're going for a perfect run. I completely understand not caring for it. Things ramp up at Bowser's Castle, where minions face off against origami versions of themselves. This place isn't very big and doesn't have much to it, but the sleeping quarters are an appreciated inclusion, showing there are still new things you can do with this setting. Eventually, everyone starts disappearing until you're attacked by paper cutouts leading up to the Handaconda. This fight can try your patience, since it's pretty particular, and it also has an oh-so-fun rock, paper, scissors gimmick. At least it's unique. There's a Sumo Brothers boss fight at the entrance as well, which is a little better with a solid foundation about taking out the smaller brothers first. These aren't amazing fights, but they work well enough, and are bolstered by a really hardcore battle theme. The lead up to the throne room is pretty gnarly, when you realize you're traipsing through the cut-up remains of Bowser's forces. And things take an even darker turn in the following fight against a paper mistake Buzzy Beetle, using their faces as armor. That is messed up. It's actually a really cool battle, and a nice warm-up to the sickest Legion of Stationery member, Scissors. In a world of paper, scissors are dangerous, and this game makes that very clear, since they not only chopped up all of Bowser's minions, but they can even one-shot Mario in the fight if he comes into any contact with the blades. Now that's intimidation. On top of this, Scissors has a confident personality. They take pleasure in the challenge, but go all out when their dignity's on the line. They were written to be cool as hell, and yeah, they are. And as on point as Origami King's boss music is, this one really captures the chaos of such a dangerous object. What a spectacular chapter. If anything's to be seen as a low point, it's the overabundance of easy-to-trigger game overs. The trip to the Spring of Jungle Mists, in particular, has several cheap opportunities. But hey, I love a lush jungle. This chapter embodies the creativity of the best Paper Mario motifs. This is such an intriguing place to explore, with compelling progression and a satisfying conclusion, which finally puts the Origami King to rest in the ring. ranking, and dang did this game rank well overall, landing in both the second and third places on the list. This game's far from perfect, but when it comes to understanding imaginative, appealing set pieces, it knows how to deliver, since most of its entries exemplify these qualities. It's honestly no surprise to see it rank so well overall. You did good, Origami King. Wow, we've really come far, haven't we? It's all been leading up to this, hasn't it? The #1 Paper Mario chapter. Do you know what it is? You probably do. But first, a brief moment to appreciate all of the chapters we've covered so far. This is the Paper Mario series, and also the Sniff It Pool song. Number 1. Paper Mario's Chapter 7, A Star Spirit on Ice. You want to talk chapters made for me? A cozy snow theme, a penguin murder mystery, a mystical palace of mirrors. The best selection of music from this title. Snowy settings are one of the more underutilized in this series. The Thousand Year Doors segment's very small, with the bulk of that chapter not even taking place there. And although Chapter 4 is the high point of Sticker Star, the Enig Mansion's doing most of the work. But here we have the theme utilized to its full potential, and it's a success. Shiver City's effortlessly charming, with a constant snowfall, warm interiors, and darling resident penguins. The penguin murder mystery is of course the standout sequence. It's not long, but it's a fun scenario with entertaining writing. Mysteries are always a plus, even if this is a simple example of that. Looking around town to find Herringway's a fun setup. It's nice to spend some time figuring things out in a town for a change. Afterwards is Starborn Valley, a magical setting that's sadly pretty empty. There's not really anything here outside of some NPCs, but it's valuable for establishing the Star Kids, and they're awfully cute. Shiver Mountain and the Crystal Palace round out the chapter with a large amount of exploration and puzzle solving. None of this is very hard to figure out, but it's nice to have a large section of gameplay before heading into the finale. The palace itself has an imaginative mirror theme, so it feels surreal to explore, and the mysterious music track really sells the mood. The boss, the Crystal King, also comes with a great track. As awesome as this guy's design is, though, he's incredibly shallow as a character. He hardly even says anything. I like that he's all business, but he's not really doing anything otherwise, and has no presence until the fight, which is also a little easy. By now you're likely well leveled and drowning in overpowered healing items and abusable badges. It's unfortunate he's not utilized better, but that's clearly not enough to bring this chapter down. As for what's left, as simple as it is, I like the solution version with the scarf and bucket. The fake boss Monstar's a memorable one, since it turns out to be a bunch of star kids trying to protect their home. It's also hilarious how much the Penguin Mayor's wife sells you out to the police, insisting you're a crazy murderer and severely stretching the truth to get you arrested, only to then heel turn completely when it turns out her husband only tripped. And I can't forget to mention the mimicking Duplagosts. A mirror-themed dungeon wouldn't be complete without creatures to copy your party members, and they take good advantage of this in multiple funny scenes. When compared to some of the more out there chapters, this one probably seems a little simple for number 1. But despite the lackluster boss, everything here works so well that it's just such a feel-good experience. The original Paper Mario is my favorite game in this series, so perhaps it's fitting that it's also the home of my favorite chapter. Nicely done, Paper Mario. This game embodies so much of what I love about this series, that inevitably a lot of its chapters were going to rank well. And looking at the list, yeah, they really did. Barely any of them even ranked in the bottom half. Nostalgia does play a part, but even trying to step away from that, I think its chapters are the most well-rounded, and that reflects in how they're ranked. So congratulations to you, Paper Mario. And would you look at that, we did it. Okay, fine. Top 5 partners in no particular order. Huey, Vivian, Bob-omb, Comic, and Dashel. There you have it. That's all 47 chapters ranked. Way to stick it through to the end. Boy, do I anticipate some differing opinions. But really, I'd love to hear any thoughts you might have on any of these chapters. My hot takes, your hot takes, let's share our love for this series. If you want to talk about this stuff a bit more directly, check out my Discord. It's an easy way we can talk and chill with some nice people. Links in the description. I'm happy I made this ranking. Paper Mario is one of my favorite series, and I wanted to celebrate the creative and unforgettable moments it's given me. And I have more rankings planned. In fact, if there's anything you'd like to see me rank or discuss, let me know in the comments. My channel is a place where I talk about and review games, mostly Nintendo stuff. My primary series is the best and worst of video games, where I choose a game, thoroughly play through it to the best of my ability, and share my thoughts on what I found the best and worst aspects of it to be. I also stream every once in a while, usually major Nintendo releases. If you liked this video and want to see more like it, consider supporting me on Patreon. Any and all contributions help me put more time into creating videos, and since I have a lot more planned, I'm grateful for any thought given to this. Finally, I want to thank my partner David for all the help he's given me with this channel. You're the best. I'd also like to thank my artist PancakeHime, who made the adorable paper Meowlin you see in the thumbnail. Check her out on X if you'd like to commission anything from her yourself. She's really great to work with. And finally, thank you, and everyone else who supports this channel and watches these videos. I'm going to keep making videos to the best of my ability, so I hope you'll continue to be here for the ride. Thanks for sticking it out to the very end. I wish you all the best in your own endeavors. Remember always to follow the passion. I'll see you next time.